All right. Okay.
And then lastly, we had the shared service kickoff
Yes.
meeting last Thursday. It was well attended, and overall I think a positive kickoff for the effort. So the consultant is on board, Collins Center from UMass Boston. And what they're doing starting this week will be making the rounds to the different department heads in both towns and getting a good lay of the land of how current departmental operations are established and how they operate, and giving ideas people might have for collaboration, more collaboration than we're currently doing. They will aim to give us at least some, one or two recommendations that we might have ready for town meeting. But the goal is to have the final report by the end of June. Midway through, in the late March, early April timeframe, we'll have a working session with both communities where they'll present some ideas and we'll vet those ideas. So that's like I say, a good kickoff meeting the other day, and we'll get underway.
Good. All right. Are they here? And just one other point of that we'll add to our February 19th meeting is an update on the board training that we did, which was very successful. We got a lot of good information back, and we'll forward you an update and summary from that meeting, including next steps, and that'll be on February 19th. All right, then. Should we go ahead with, I wonder if we can do it now and, are they
Everything
here?
else is time.
Hmm?
Everything else is Zoom now.
I know. We're running a few minutes late because the police folks are a little late in their piece, but if we can see what we've got, maybe we can squeeze you in on your regular time. Are you sure? Okay. They are here? Okay. Oh. Yeah, I guess.
Chuck's out there, but he's still not in.
Yeah, I think we should try to do that. The one that fire interactive?
Yes, you can.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll end up having to probably interrupt it. But
Yeah, okay. Chief, are you okay to go ahead with your after action report? And we can do that, and if we need to take a pause to take a picture, and we can do that. Yeah, would you come up front and just
Chuck, too.
speak into that? Chuck?
I don't know.
Here he is, yeah, come on up. Okay, so the reason we're, tonight, and for those of you that may not be aware, we had a very sad situation here a week ago on Sunday where one of our community members' house burned down. It was a very sad situation, and certainly our heart goes out to them and their family. They lost everything. And tonight we had a meeting last week with the members of the community, and tonight Chief Beardsley is going to give us the after action report about what happened and what we can learn from that and plan some things going forward. So, Chief, off to you. And if you can use the microphone just because they can pick it up on the. Thank
Okay,
you.
how's that?
Great.
Okay, so I think most of the members have a copy of the report. Okay, good, thank you. So the fire, as we all know, it began on that Sunday when we had that terrible ice and snowstorm that was taking place. And when the call came in, the caller was reporting that his garage was on fire, and we already knew we had a bad situation that was about to get worse. I've frequently called this particular fire the perfect storm because we had a combination of the weather, the location, hydrant issues with water supply, and just getting people to the scene. You know, one of the more difficult access points that we have in the town. Some of the good things that did happen, we had staffed up with 2 extra firefighters on duty starting at 6 p.m. the evening before, and they were supposed to be on until 6 o'clock on Sunday night. So that gave us the ability to staff not just the engine with 3 firefighters, but also the ladder truck, which that gave us a lot of good flexibility. So that was one of the things that did go well in our favor, was we had the staffing available to handle this type of a situation. The second thing was, en route to the call, we had an acting lieutenant that was on duty that day. He heard the seriousness of the situation, and he immediately upped the fire to what we call a second alarm, which that starts bringing in Beverly and Gloucester and Essex into our scene. Second good decision that he made was when he entered in University Lane, he told the ladder truck to hold. And that was there was one critical decision that was made that was at the right moment. It was that. By holding the ladder truck there, he knew what the road conditions were very likely going to be. So he entered, he said, let me make sure the path is clear. The chains were down on the trucks, and as he's entering, that's when things started to go bad. The road was so packed down at that point because of, I think, roughly about, 6 hours of freezing rain that we had. The chains, and because of the crown of the road, the outside edge of the fire truck began to slip. He tried to take evasive measures to avoid slipping, and because of the crown, because of the ice, it just went right into the ditch. And on that whole stretch right there, it's all ditch. One of the good things is on that side of University Lane, there is a hydrant, which was on the same side of the street as the fire. So when he did get stuck, contacted the ladder truck, told them to come in from a different route. At the same time, our squad truck was also responding, so they were able to come in through Magnolia onto Overledge and start operations there. One of the amazing parts was how fast, given the circumstances and the conditions, it was roughly, I think it was like roughly 32 minutes, we had water going on the fire. That was an amazing part itself. When the apparatus did arrive on scene, the fire had already extended into the house. We had a high wind blowing that day, the garage doors were open, and the way that the wind was blowing was coming basically out of the north. The garage doors were facing somewhat to the north, so it was just a big whirlwind that was oxygen just feeding that fire, and it just whirled its way right into the main part of the house. If there was one good thing that came out of it, there was a very large house that was roughly about 40 feet away. There was not one bit of fire damage. It did get smoke staining and such, which is going to be expected in such a circumstances. But through the efforts of our firefighters and the Gloucester fellas and people from Beverly, we were able to get a hose line in between the two buildings to stop the radiant heat from igniting that building. That to me was just absolutely amazing that we were able, with that volume of fire, able to stop the fire from extending any further. If the decision had been made to bring the ladder truck in at the same time onto University Lane, we probably would have had that house go also. There's no question in my mind we would not have been able to get the resources in there fast enough to put a stop to it. But like I said, there was a couple of good decisions. I believe it was when the first police officer came on scene, he had said what the situation was, so we advanced it to a third alarm. When we start bringing in these different alarms, we start bringing in apparatus and manpower from different towns. And it wasn't a case of where we needed the apparatus, we needed the bodies.
Mhm.
And by getting those bodies in there very quickly, we had to hike hoses from Overledge through a backyard, through the street, and then up to protect the house and the house next door. That was a big thing. I mentioned about water supply being an issue with us. At one point, Hamilton had an engine on the hydrant, and they quite literally could not draw a drop. And I know one of the residents the other night had commented that she wanted to get some water for the firefighters. When she opened up her tap, she had nothing. Now, in the fire service, we do calculations. We do some very quick fire ground math to find out what we call the needed fire flow, how many gallons per minute of water we need to fight the fire. When I got there, I talked to Jim Doucette, who was running the fire scene at the time, and I asked him how many lines he had out and what was happening. And I looked at the fire, did some rough numbers, and we needed 1,500 gallons a minute. And the fact is we had about 500. And again, how how we were fortunate enough to keep everything contained to where the fire began is just a miracle within itself, given the circumstances. Other good news was everybody was out of the house. They confirmed that very early, that the homeowner, there was only one person at home at the time, he was able to get his 2 dogs out of the house and then give a call to the fire department. The other thing is we didn't have, in spite of all of the snow, all of the cold, nobody injured, no firefighters injured. And when you think of, we probably, at the height of the fire, we probably had close to 30 firefighters in various locations fighting the fire or pumping water, and we didn't have one person get injured. That within itself, again, is just another miracle that was on our side that day. What we've done, there's been a tremendous amount of soul searching has taken place, because whenever you have a big fire like this, sometimes it exposes deficiencies, and one of the big deficiencies was our water. We know here in town we have several sites that this is not the only place something like this could happen. When I say we've spent the past 2 weeks every day, we have been going out, doing drive-arounds, checking different sites, looking at what we've got for hydrants and such, trying to get wrapped around, if we had circumstances anywhere in town like this again, how do we go after it? I've already made calls, because one of the big backup that we can do are what's called tankers, which hold a large quantity of water in them. Essex has one that holds about 2,300 gallons of water. For a fire like that, it wouldn't have lasted long, but it certainly would have given us a big punch very quickly. I spoke to our what we call district control point, which is kind of like a filtering point whenever we need equipment and services. They're located in Beverly. And I asked them about, how can I get, if I needed more tankers, where would I get them? I kind of knew where I'd get them from. I wanted to hear it from them, because they've got an inventory sheet. They can tell me how much and what they have. Nearest tankers are Middleton and Boxford. Now, I know how long it takes me to drive over here each day, and I'm figuring with a truck that holds about 2,500 gallons, you're probably talking about the best part of an hour that's going to take apparatus to get here. Now, so how do we overcome that? That gets into the next phase of, do we look at certain target hazards? And Chuck and I have been going through this about every other day, I think. I feel like I'm spending more time talking to you than anybody else. But we're looking at, do we, when we have identified locations in the town that could be a combination of old systems, limited water supply, how do we overcome it? If we know right away, we've got the possibility, like we did on that day, we start what they call a task force coming towards Manchester. And the nice thing about that is you get there and you're able to get the fire knocked down without having to use any more resources. Well, we give them our thanks and send them home. That's typical in the fire service. We call those things line boxes. You hear every day on the radio, different departments, because of maybe a location or a site that's a problem or an issue, they dispatch other fire departments immediately. I was listening to Danvers and Middleton do that today for a site. And Danvers got there was no problem. They sent the Middleton engine back home. And we can do the same thing here. The other thing, and I haven't had a chance to talk with Chief Conley about it, but the poor dispatcher is one person that is taking the call, dispatching equipment. I did just kind of some rough calculations when I was looking at the timeline. Within a 15-minute period, she spoke to 10 different pieces of fire apparatus. And then on top of it all, she's got the police maybe having a matter going on that they're trying to resolve, plus just the normal day-to-day business of the town, people calling in. I was listening to the tapes again today, and people calling in. I have smoke down, in my yard. Is something going on? Yes, so the dispatcher has to handle that. Trying to get a second dispatcher in, they were able to do that, but it took quite a while for that second dispatcher to come on scene, because I believe he came from Rockport, I believe. So one way to overcome that is, again, we can use the resources in Beverly. We call Beverly Control. We can use them. If we find that at a lower alarm, like at a second alarm, that there's just so much that is going on that poor dispatcher needs help. She can just with one radio call say, Beverly Control, give us a hand. And then they will take care of dispatching of additional apparatus and services for us. And meanwhile, she can still perform the duties that she needs in the day-to-day operation of the town. So, like I said, we're looking at that right now with our firefighters working with tanker supply trucks. It's not something we're normally used to doing in this town. So we're looking, again, this is going to be something a little bit further down the road in the process, but building a drill and seeing how all this works. If we call a Middleton and a Boxer, how long is it going to take them in reality to get here? And, that will be left to be seen. So, those are a few of the things that we're doing to try to address this. Not an easy task because we don't like the outcome when we have fires like this. They're just, they're sad for all of us because we don't like to lose.
Yes. Well, thank you.
So any questions that you may have?
I have a couple, but I just wanted to see if Chuck wanted to weigh in on anything in addition DPW side of this.
Yeah, just real quick, I guess I'll just go over. I mean, for that storm in particular, we were out around, I believe, 3 o'clock the day before, starting with sanding and salting operations. Went through the night into the next day, and continued. I think we did respond as well to the scene to keep sanding it as all these trucks and equipment were going in and out. It was again with the sleet, rain, ice, the salt and sand that we had put down earlier had probably washed away by the time they had responded. So, our guys were out on their routes, but varying degrees of success just in terms of that. We had looked at also we've talked to our guys about maybe sending out one of our smaller sand and salters to some of these higher elevation, tougher areas to make sure that if there's a call like this that we give it a one more layer of protection. In terms of the water system, as I said the other night, this is not something that's unique to this one area. There's a lot of 100-plus-year-old mains in town, unlined cast iron pipes. Al has one of my pictures. I have more pictures and more pipe that I've sent to the lab. It's going to be an ongoing basis, but unfortunately, I don't see us getting to all of it this summer or in the next several summers. So it's just going to be one of those things where we continue with our capital improvements plans, and eventually that will pay off around the entire town. But in this case, it's too little, too late.
Board members, any questions?
Yeah. One question on dispatch. This is a while ago, so I may not be remembering it properly, but I thought that we maintained a backup console here in town, and that the idea was if we had a dispatcher heavily involved in exactly this kind of situation, we would roll like a reserve officer on backup console and have them handle the back.
Chief Colley could better speak to that as far as the person. Yeah, there is a second console in there, but it's the time lag from the time that person is needed until they arrive on the scene. And I want to say this was, I think it was like 30 or 45 minutes before that extra help was able to come in because we had everybody else tied up on scene.
So we had all our officers up on scene and all our police officers up on scene.
I'm not sure how many were on duty. I know we had 2 of them up at the scene, that were helping us.
Okay. One last note, and this is great, and I'm very pleased to hear that you've already started taking action on looking at the longer term. One of the things that we had at the end of our meeting on Tuesday was a commitment to look at short, medium, and long-term goals and do that interdepartmentally, so between fire, DPW, police, to make sure that we can account for all of this. One thing that I'm very sensitive to is the folks up on University obviously are very concerned. They've been through a tremendous trauma in that neighborhood. We talked about what short-term measures we can take with them. In particular, looking at the routes going up there. I think that's some of the things you're doing, the extra sanding opportunities, perhaps the possibility of looking at a cistern at some point. I would like to highlight that as a priority as sort of the short-term pieces here. is to see what we can do to respond to them in a fairly short order, to let them know that we heard them, we understand where they stand, and, respect where they are, but they're also responding to those issues. So we don't need to get into a lot of detail tonight about that, but I would like that follow-up so we can just know at our next meeting on the 19th that was taken care of.
I think I had a couple of things. I mean, I think, I appreciate the report. It seems like it could be very easy for all of us to let this kind of drift into the past. And I'm not saying we're intending that to happen, but the next thing that we have to deal with is inevitably going to come our way, and time's going to pass, and we're going to get filled with things to do. I guess, there's some pretty significant things that seem to be coming out of this that it seems like, in addition to a post-mortem of the event itself, like we need some sort of sooner remediation plan. And piggybacking off what you just said, it doesn't seem like we've learned some things, but I don't know how the town is different now, other than being more aware of some things. And some of them are tied to circumstances that I'm not sure are going to repeat themselves. Some of them are tied to things that fundamentally aren't changing, and we're still left with a level of risk. I live in a neighborhood that is a carbon copy of where there was a fire, so I don't necessarily feel safer now. But it seems like there's a few things that came from your observations and from the report, and I guess I'm kind of looking for answers to what we're going to do about them, because it doesn't seem like they're going to remediate themselves. So one would be the issue of, in a backup plan where, in light of also the pipes in this town, like it seems like we're going to potentially run into this problem if there is another event of this magnitude with access to water. So it may be that a tanker is in Essex, and maybe a tanker is in somewhere farther north towards New Hampshire, is what you were saying. So,
Well, when it comes to the water supply, the problem is the water supply you have is the water supply you've got.
yeah, exactly.
You can't make more water. The water that's in the pipes is the water that's in the pipes.
No, I get that.
Whether it's 500 gallons a minute or not. The things of an immediate nature that, I said again, Chuck and I have been talking about is identifying water resources right here in town, like ponds or streams.
Yeah.
We don't have a whole lot of them, and what you have to be cognizant of is our pumps are very powerful. And when they're trying to draw water, you need a deep, it's not like a couple of inches,
Yeah.
and it's not like your swimming pool, because
Yeah.
number one, trying to get into your swimming pool is going to be a challenge within itself.
I'm believing everything you're saying. So I guess the question is, what are we going to do about it?
Well, and this is where, when you have this tanker task force kind of thing, and I was talking to the Essex chief over the weekend about, right now, we bring the ladder truck in here when we go to a working fire. And I said, why not, instead of bringing your ladder truck, you bring your tanker? Because with that tanker, there's 2,300 gallons of water in that. It also has a thing called a portable pond, or a portable tank, whatever you want to refer to it as. And it's a device that it folds up, fits on the fire truck. When it gets to the scene, one person can pop it open, and you fill it up with the water. So now what you can do is you can go to a hydrant, nearby, and run the water, what we call a water shuttle, back and forth. As Middleton, Boxford arrive on the scene, I know Middleton has a tank, a tank also. I'm not sure if Boxford has one of those tanks, but if you got two of those tanks going, you could have as much as 5,000 gallons of water standing by as a backup. This is a labor-intensive task. If you get there was one driveway I was up a couple of weeks ago on Summer Street, not too far from where this fire was. It was a half a mile long. We don't have a half a mile of hose.
So I guess I'm taking everything you're saying, and I'm accepting it. Like, you're better trained than I am at this profession. But my layman understand is that we called trucks from other towns that adjacent to our town, and by that point it was too late. So developing a supplemental water strategy with Amesbury or whatever town you mentioned, I'm familiar with all the towns, but they seem far away. It doesn't seem like that's going to work. So what are we going to do here, I guess? I don't have the answer. We don't need to come up with it tonight. But if we're calling other fire trucks that aren't even water related, they're just fire trucks, to fight the fire, and they're already arriving too late because the house was gone, my understanding, by that point, by the time they arrived.
Yeah.
We're left with an even bigger problem. Like, we need our own water strategy. So I guess I'm looking, like, this is an example of where I think we need to come up with a more concrete next step for the sake of the town. That's not a criticism of what you're proposing, it's just, it just doesn't seem like it's gonna be enough.
So back to my initial summary point of a short, mid, and long-term interdepartmental
Yeah.
strategy, that's what I'm talking about. It's being very specific with what we can do, both with our list of priorities in terms of areas that we have to pay attention to with the water, and tying in the pieces you're talking about in conjunction with whatever else we can do. So I guess my feeling is I want this to be a comprehensive look
Yeah,
at all of that so that we can address it.
I guess I would say, let's, you know, I have some other things that I'd like to kind of throw into the mix. I think they're already covered, but they stand out to me. You know, on this topic, I'm fairly ignorant, right? So if they stand out to me, I think that says something. But the training in terms of what specifically, what new training are you thinking of because of this event? And are there going to be on-site training? Like, will I see people on Highland Avenue where I live? Will we see people on University? Will there be live drills? This doesn't have to be for show. This isn't like a military parade in Washington or anything like that. This is like actually, are we training in place where these things happen?
Can I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
Because we are so backed up. Can we get our list of questions to the chief?
Yeah.
And come back to this on the 19th?
Yeah.
So that we have a chance to give him an opportunity to see them, get back.
Yeah, I'm not trying to catch you here with any of these
No,
things.
but
It's
I
more
would
like,
love to have the
I think we
conversation.
just
and
need to,
yeah,
I think we need to be really clear on,
absolutely.
like, not just what we're gonna do next, but also the timing. Like, I think we need to be really specific, like, by March 31, we have at least, you know, a very short-term set of actions that help the safety of the town. I think also address some resident concerns. Because I think, it sounds like everyone was doing everything they could, so I don't really have necessarily criticism about what anybody did. It's just, I think we have a lot of people in town who are
I agree.
very nervous.
So let's all, as a board, send our notes, our questions to Greg and the chief, and then let's put this back on our agenda for the 19th so that we can have a follow-up timeframe plan. Certainly, Chuck, you're
Yeah,
engaged in that as
good.
well.
Thank
Okay.
you.
All right, any other comments from the board? Okay. All right, chief, you're here. Yay. Thank you very much. And I do want to underscore the thanks to our first responders for the amazing work that they did. So thank you very much. Okay, we're ready for our second swearing in. Chief Conley, you all set?
Yeah.
Great. Bring in your. Oops. Didn't want to put you.
Good evening.
Yep.
Good evening. You ready? Yes, I just want to, I know you're tight for time, so
It's
we'll be
okay.
very quick. I want to introduce everybody to our newest Manchester by the Sea police officers, Officer Gilson, Officer Locke, Officer Martin, and Officer Coulter. Very proud of these four, and I know they're very excited to be here tonight with their families. And without any ado, we'll move forward.
Please raise your right hands. Do you solemnly swear that you will faithfully and impartially discharge and perform all duties incumbent upon you to the best of your knowledge and ability as police officers for the town of Manchester by the Sea, in accordance with the town's bylaws, the laws of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and the Constitution of the United States of America?
Thank you. And I'll just say a few more words now that they're all empowered, sworn in. So if you haven't read or heard, Officer Locke and Officer Gilson are first full-time female police officers in the history of the Manchester Police Department. Something they really wanted me to point out tonight and draw everybody's attention to. But I want to point out something else. So the fact that they're the first female police officers had nothing really to do with their gender. They received no extra points. They competed in an open exam. They received additional points for their training and experience, just like every other candidate did, and the two of them rose to the number 1 and 2 position on our candidate list. So I'm sure they're very proud, and if they should be very proud of that. And Officer Gilson, of course, is the daughter of retired Sergeant Gilson, longtime sergeant here, Manchester Police Department. She also has a law degree from Suffolk University, which is impressive, and we're glad we were able to recruit her. Of course, Officer Locke has been a long time dispatcher here. If you've ever called during the day in the last several years, you probably spoke with Andrea Locke, and she was a value asset there, and she's even more valuable to us on the street, actually engaging with residents in their homes. Officer Martin is newer to the Manchester Police Department. He was a reserve with us for just about a year, and this was our first opportunity to have him sworn in ceremonially. And of course, Officer Coulter Shute has been with us for a very long time as an auxiliary officer, just recently graduated college, and very excited to have him on board. He's an outstanding officer. So thank you very much for coming here tonight. Thank you. One thing I'll say to the family members that are here is the work that they do when they come here, whether they're a full-time officer or reserve officer, is critical. There's no difference. So people that we deal with, whether they're there to help somebody or put someone in custody, no one differentiates between a full-time officer and a reserve officer. So we treat them both the same here. One just works part-time, and one dedicates their full-time to the job. So very proud of them, and I also will make you a promise that their safety, their training is something that is very important to me. So you can know that. Thank you very much.
Come up and take a quick picture with us? Congratulations. You can come over here and then we'll speak. So exciting. It's gotta get in the corner. Can you get us okay? Wow.
Yeah.
You good? All right. Okay.
All right.
All right, thank you very much.
Sure, I know, finally up in that window.
Okay, back on track. Not quite, but we'll keep moving. All right. Next up, you want to come on up? Chrissy, you're wearing like 15 hats tonight. All this work. All right. We'll just let these folks move on. So next on our agenda tonight is the town meeting topic, and we have 2 items on that: electronic voting and the petition articles, a quick review. So if we'd like to start, Christina and Alan, who would like to
Yep.
start with that?
I'll just make a couple of, hello, is it on?
Yeah.
A couple of brief introductory remarks. First one is, generally on the subject of electronic voting, all the feedback I've gotten from voters has been consistently positive. Everybody likes it. People especially like the ability to vote in private. So I think, although there's some concern about cost, I think we should address that by getting a less expensive alternative and not by junking the idea altogether. Second thing I want to say is Christina has done a fabulous job of investigating alternatives, looking at other vendors who do this more cost effectively, and also initiating the possibility of shared services with other towns. And I just can't say enough about the job she has done to bring that together very quickly. So, Christina.
Thank you.
We were tasked with reviewing the cost of electronic voting and we're looking at the leasing versus purchasing options. It's clear that purchasing is much more affordable. Since this document was produced, we found that the new Memorial School Auditorium will hold 1,000 chairs, so that would be our maximum number of units that we buy. An annual licensing agreement of $1,000 or $2,000 would be our fixed annual cost versus being having meetings cost over $10,000 for leasing. I was this year was my first foray into electronic voting, and I became a believer after the recreational marijuana vote. I feel that people were able to be honest with their thoughts on that and move forward without having to worry if there's kids' teachers behind them or seeing how they're voting. So we're working with other communities to get into cooperative agreements. A lot of us small towns are facing, the same fiscal crises where we're looking at what we're spending. And if we were able to go in with another community to split the cost, whether it be based on a percent of beneficial interest, based on percent of population or registered voters, the more communities that we add in, the more affordable it is. We wouldn't want to add in too many. We don't want to deal with hierarchy of meeting conflicts and so on and so forth. But rather than spending $40,000 on technology that we use once or twice a year, if we can cut that in half or cut that by any amount and reach out to our neighbors and share back and forth, it will save money in its first year.
Thank you. Very comprehensive. And we had a note to cover that. Any questions from the board? Any thoughts, comments?
I had a quick question. In addition to cost, did you look at security of these solutions?
It's based on a radio frequency, so each of the clickers have a serial number, and that serial number is pre-programmed into the software. It's an interface through a Microsoft PowerPoint. Essentially, that's what we're paying for is the software. So the software and the receivers are only able to get data that's coming in from those serial numbers.
I guess I'm talking more about network security and the ability to tap into a network to disrupt voting.
It's based on radio signals and radio frequency.
But the
So they
feed
have
from
to-
the closed network has to feed back to some sort of central database at some point. And I guess
As a receiver, it's a USB drive that's attached to a laptop, and whether or not we choose to attach that to the internet.
Unlike the system that we're using now, its communication is not internet-based.
okay.
It's just based on a radio transmission.
It's one reason why we're not really concerned about antiquated technology is the radio frequencies have shown themselves through. They have millions and millions of these devices throughout the country. So if they were to upgrade or change, they'd lose a lot of their business. So their business model shows a longevity. We looked into votes, an online phone-based, app-based one. Little hesitant on that because town meeting, there's a lot of unknowns that come up. We wanted to limit that as much as we can. We don't want to deal with suppressing wireless, so not having Wi-Fi. We don't think personal technology should preclude someone from being able to participate. Nice thing about these radio handhelds, there is an app-based interface we can use for general polling that does not have to be sort of geo-fenced. So we can use our annual licensing agreement to do just general surveys on, what are your thoughts on shared services or things like that. So we can use that for town meeting and general surveys.
So, for example, if we'd had this technology when everyone was working on the master plan, it could have been used to poll residents without them having to be in a physical location. Couple other points on the comparison of this to the current technology we're using. Like the current technology, it preserves the privacy of everyone's vote. It does it in a different way than this one, and I won't bore you with the details of that, but that was one of the important considerations for me, that it could have that quality. The other thing is that, although it's certainly attractive to possibly share a purchase with other towns, and that obviously makes it more affordable, even if we go into this by ourselves, it's basically a 2-year payback versus what we're paying now.
Any other questions from the board?
Does any of the data ever leave the town premise, or is it housed, or is it always held at the location of the voting itself? Once, even if it's captured through radio frequency, it's stored in some sort of central drive, right?
On the
And
laptop and however
what
you
happens
want
to the data on that drive? Is that then also retained by the company as proprietary, or does that remain the property?
I haven't gone that deep. It basically, you're just going to get X number of yes votes and X number of no votes. We're going to walk away with the same data as I'd have in my paper notebook at the end of the night.
But it will be our laptop.
It would be stored on our machine, so it would stay
So the
with
data's
us.
never pooled back with some sort of central
No.
data collection?
No, in fact, what's one of the things that's different about this system from the current provider system is that once it's up and running, we will staff it. We will maintain the equipment. We will need to make sure that all the batteries are changed when they need to be and so forth. But all of the data remains with us. It doesn't go anywhere. The company does offer for the first time to come on scene for free and basically manage the system for our first meeting with it as a trial.
And when are we anticipating that?
Well, that's a good question. Christina and I were aiming for this fall's special, particularly in light of the fact that it will take some time to conduct the procurement and if we want to line up other towns to come to some kind of intermunicipal agreement. The Finance Committee was really anxious to have us move it up to the spring annual. And there's really no downside to doing that. We can have the company come in, manage the system for us. We wouldn't have to have an intermunicipal agreement in place. We wouldn't have to spend any money because they do it for free. And we can contract with them after the meeting if we all like it. And our thought would be to put a capital article on the warrant at the end, the last article in the warrant. And if people are satisfied with it, we'll see if they vote for it.
And the article to change the wording for electronic voting will be there as well?
Well, that's
standard.
a separate question.
Right, but that'll be part of this as well.
That I wouldn't make it part of the same vote because we should do that in any case.
Right, but that's what I'm
intend to
saying,
continue.
it's another topic though that we need to cover in the meeting, right, okay.
Another awesome thing about this interface that it is all PowerPoint based. So once we're in the new school, we have the projector ability there. Then we can change motions on the floor and the audience can read them. We can do consultants, points. We'll have to set a policy on it and exactly what we want to do, but it just aligns us for the future town meeting.
Very good.
It just said that the clickers have a 10-year lifespan, and is that just, they say it's a general lifespan, but is there any warranty or guarantee that comes with the clickers if they encounter any problems?
I'd have to review the fine print of the contract, but I believe there is a warranty. I'll eliminate it. We have an annual licensing and maintenance agreement as well. That would be ongoing service fee.
So you said that some of the technology could be used for polling. Obviously, that's not the way you use clickers. You're talking about the PowerPoint-driven layout for issues, or what aspects of this are?
It would be through this company's web portal. It would be separate from the PowerPoint thing. So just using our licensing agreement for their software and polling capabilities, whether it's using our PowerPoint via radio read for town meetings, our closed unit, or we can go online.
It'd be nice to get a presentation on what that support is. Maybe I can just stop by and get a presentation from you, or
Yep, we can set up a conference call, or he'll be in the area in the spring, so we can have him come down.
That's good. All right, I think, so is the consensus of the board to move ahead with this and try for April town meeting? Everybody good with that? Yeah,
The vendor, I have penciled him in, so he is available, so.
Okay, good. Great.
10 minutes, and we can do that.
Nice work, excellent. Okay, I just would like to tonight just delineate the petition articles. I don't want to get into too much discussion. I'd like to go forward on the 19th, subsequent to this, to get into the meat of the petition articles, but for tonight, if we can just list what they are, that would be great.
So why don't we start off with Alan's request
Yeah.
on the electronic voting as part of the bylaw?
So the general bylaw, Article 2, which deals with town meetings, has a section, which is Section 13, that deals with how votes are conducted. Right now, it doesn't say anything about electronic voting, and it does provide that if any 20 voters request, we go to a paper ballot. We ought to fix that so that we include electronic voting as one of the measures, and not continue to have the possibility that after we've had a secret vote electronically, 20 voters could request a paper ballot, and so we'd spend an hour and a half essentially repeating the outcome. So that's the only purpose. I should say that I thought about that, and
I would be prepared to rule that request out of order if we just had a secret electronic vote. But I won't be around forever, and I think it's a good idea to
We hope
write it,
you are.
write it in the bylaw.
Thank you. Okay, good. All right. Greg, what others? Do we have any others?
So then we have two citizen petition articles. One is on a question, a non-binding question as to whether or not we should continue to fluoridate the water with chemical fluoride. And second article, petition article, is concerning banning certain plastics, styrofoam, from food operations in town. So those are the two petitions. They have their requisite 10 plus signatures, so they qualify. I know that Gary Gilbert was
He's
there.
here,
Oh,
yeah.
he's over there. I'm sorry. So those are the two, and if you want to take a quick comment from the petitioners, that would be fine.
Okay. Do you have a comment, quick? Well, we're going to do that next meeting. So, yes. So if you want to just do a quick recap of what your petition article is, that's fine, but we're going to jump to the next meeting to get the detail on that, if that's okay.
Well, the bylaw that's proposed is to ban the distribution of plastic straws, plastic cutlery, to-go containers, and styrofoam. And so that would affect Crosby's and the restaurants in town. And I've already started speaking to a number of restaurants, and they've actually almost been enthusiastic, or they've already started on this path. Cala's has got bioplastic straws. I could go on, but I don't think I have much time. But I think the big thing to discuss is what the alternative products are. We're giving people resources to find alternatives, to give you feedback from the merchants, and to discuss with you how to manage the bylaw once it's in place. Because I suspect at least there'd be a meeting or two with some of us and the Board of Health or whoever administers it to understand how to sort of analyze what products, alternative products are out there. Everybody's saying this could take a week or two to a month or two to phase into. It's not like the plastic bags where we allowed 6 months for people to use up their stores. They don't have that much. And I just say, we have a reputation in the state for being the second town to ban plastic straws, and we would be the fifth town to ban all three of these items. And we've got a lot of support behind it statewide too.
Great. Well, I think it's an amazingly good effort, number one. Number two, the topics you just talked about are the things that we would like to cover in our next meeting, which gets into the detail of the merchant's viewpoint, how it could possibly be phased in, and the governance of that, which I think town hall will help us with in terms of framing that up. So support in terms of this and hearing more about it for sure on the 19th. So thank you for that.
Okay, and we'd love it if you would vote to actually co-sponsor the effort. That would be very proactive of you, but we'll talk in 2 weeks.
We'll talk. Okay. Anything else? Any other comments from anybody?
Can we give
Yes.
Barry the items back?
Oh, yeah, give him his plastic things. All right, okay. Are we good for the piece of this? Any other
So the only
comments?
other special articles, if you will, I know that Christina has a few that we had talked about before. I have a quick memo from her outlining two in detail, and then she's still working on a third. One is to make sure that all boards and committees are filing the minutes in the clerk's office as the official repository of town business. The second one has to do with late licensing of dogs, and that there's a progression of fines rather than just one flat fine. And the third was the potential of seeking special legislation to allow the parking fees to go to 35. So those are the three that you need to consider adding to the warrant.
Okay, good. So let's make that our item for the 19th, and we'll go through those in detail. Anything else from our folks here? No? Okay. That's it for town meeting. Thank you very much. Good evening. Have a nice night. Okay, well, we're not too bad off here. It's 7:10, amazingly so. We are, next on our agenda is the presentation and discussion on Central Street Dam, Culvert Project, and Mill Pond. Do you want to tee us up for that, Greg?
Sure. So the town has been researching, analyzing, investigating, collecting data on the Sawmill Brook watershed for a number of years now. We have numerous grants that have funded various studies on the watershed. In particular, we are moving now towards details of a construction project, particularly for the culvert and dam that goes over Central Street. It is in fair to poor condition. I think it's fair to say we've done some emergency repairs to the culvert, and it needs a complete reconstruction very soon. The good news is we've received some state support for doing that construction. Have a $500,000 grant to help pay for that project. Town meeting has approved additional dollars. Depending on the scope and how far upstream we have to go, we may need more dollars. But nonetheless, we're well on our way to at least fixing the immediate needs of the culvert. The design upstream, in terms of the impact on the pond itself, will take some decision making on our part. Tonight we have David Loring from Ty and Bond, who's been our consulting engineers on this project. David will walk us through a summary of the studies that have been done and some of the data that's collected to date, and present the three options for the pond itself, and talk about its impact in relationship to the bridge and culvert. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to David.
Thank you, Greg. I'm David Loring with Ty and Bond. Really intended to be a fairly high-level overview. Memos were presented to the board a couple weeks ago that went into more detail. Past projects presentations, we did one in September and one in October, and I think both of those have been presented to the board. So this is intended really not so much to present new information, but rather just a high-level overview of where we're at, and then, you know, looking to take ownership of the project and a little bit of guidance as we look to advance the MVP portion of it. So, as Greg mentioned, we've been doing studies, HH study along Sawmill Brook upstream, downstream of Central Pond to understand the water levels, how they relate to one another, the function of the tide gate, and the constriction of the Central Street culvert itself. The project data was completed under an MET grant, which then moved us into an MVP grant, which the town has been fortunate to receive funding under both of those programs. The next steps in the Municipal Vulnerability Program grant, the MVP, is to make some decisions regarding the future direction of Central Pond. We did present some alternates, and I'll go into those in a little bit. This is just an overview of the project area that we're talking about. It really begins just south of Central Street and extends northerly or upstream approximately 900 feet, encompassing Sawmill Brook and what we call the pond area with the marshes, the retaining wall on the east side, then the natural shoreline on the west. The other components of the project, the tide gate, which I'll talk about in a little bit of detail, and the bridge project itself. So, the MVP grant established several goals for that program, which the town supported in acquiring that funding, which was flood mitigation, fish passage, aesthetics, channel improvements, wildlife habitat, fall improvements, and public access. Those in varying levels of priority, but those were all parts of the funding grant that the agencies were looking for out of the project. The areas that I intended to kind of focus at a high level tonight were the pond restoration itself, the tide gate function. I know there's been a lot of questions that came out of the public meetings we had on the function of the tide gate and what's going to happen with that in the future, and then a brief touch on the pond banks itself. So the prior meetings talked about 3 different improvement projects for the pond under the MVP grant. Presenting to the town, we looked at 3 different alternatives. A low-level impoundment. The intent there was to provide some form of a water body on a more permanent basis, so that when you remove the tide gate, there would be something to retain water as you looked out over it. It would not be as deep as the current water body, but rather a lower level water body. Another option, and we had some pushback on this one as it's not necessarily a natural feature in this type of a ecological system, but a stream with some pools and riffles. The idea, again, create a meandering stream with some low level impoundments, so you have some small pooling of water, creating some isolated habitat, but yet a continuous flow of water through the pond area itself. And the final was to go back towards a more natural stream restoration as it existed, if you would, 200 years ago before the roadway came through the tide gate and all the other structures and improvements. So those were the options that were presented. The next slide, real quickly, we did a series of renderings, just trying to demonstrate what it would look like. This would be a low-level impoundment. We would replant the marsh area, so you'd still see a lot of vegetation coming through the water line at a higher tide elevation. Lower tide, that water would drop, and you'd see more just the plantings themselves with the stream meandering through it. The next one was the pools and riffles. Just giving an idea of how the stream would widen. Again, vegetations. The lower left shows a series of rocks which would constitute what we call a riffle. It backs up water, but yet allows flow through it at higher elevations. And the final one we presented was more the stream restoration itself. Again, just a meandering stream that's probably more of slightly higher tide, not necessarily low tide. There's certainly not enough flow from the upland watershed to support that level of water, but that was the general concept with the plantings. One other note, we mentioned public access. Midway up on the right-hand side, you'll see kind of a gray platform coming out. That was just intended to be some type of a feature that would allow the public to come down, to the edge of the marsh area. We put them in different areas. People use them just as a passive type of recreation. But by no means is that where it should be, or if it should even be included in the project itself. But many people like to see something of that nature. So. The next slide shows the table that we prepared as part of the presentation, looking at each one of the alternatives and trying to give some weight and rating to factors to be considered in what the pond should look like, or what options should be pursued for the permit level of this particular grant. We looked at feasibility, what is the likelihood of constructing this, permitting, how the degree of permitting. The natural stream was favored by many of the agencies, and we would expect that to expedite permitting all the way up to creating a pond or a low-level impoundment, which likely would require even dam permitting, so it would be a rather complex, lengthy permitting project. And then as you step down through, you can see the construction costs, the public benefits. Some of the complexity and the maintenance were big issues. With a natural stream, your maintenance costs as you look forward are low because there's really not much to do. We'd be looking to maintain vegetation so we don't have invasive species taking over. And if the natural stream wanted to meander too close to a retaining wall one side or another, it might need a little bit of encouragement to make sure that it doesn't intrude on property or cause additional erosion. And then we looked at grant potential, where you could get additional funding for each different option. This was really one of the focuses that we need some input from the board as we look to advance the deliverables under the MVP grant. They're looking for permit level drawings, and we're really at a concept stage at this point that's been presented to the public, but needs a decision coming out of the town as to where we go. So you may want to come back to this for discussion after we wrap up here. A couple of other things we did look at in the course of the work, the retaining wall along the east side. We looked at the construction itself. It, as everyone knows, is beginning to fail. It's kind of at a tipping point. There's cracks, there's areas that are collapsing now. I know DPW has concerns in some areas. So we looked at that. We also presented a series of options for that as well on the next slide. Prepared a table to evaluate each of those options. The living shoreline concept, which is the middle photograph, was more strongly favored as a recommended alternative on the west side, where you've got more gentle sloping embankments. The other side, where we've got the stone embankment now, which is in relatively poor shape. We looked at more of an MSE wall, which is a small segmental block wall, that kind of a split face architectural finish. There's a lot of different treatments that you can do there to be more compatible with the existing wall as far as aesthetics and viewing it. We also looked at green gabions, which are a wire basket filled with rock, but you can plant them and put a green facade on the outside, so it's not as intrusive. Again, not any particular favored one there, but these were selected over a more rigid concrete wall given the soils out there. We did a geotechnical boring program and found that there's a clay layer beneath your top layers, which cause a lot of settlement, reason for the cracking and failing of the existing wall. It also retains groundwater, which drains very slowly from those materials behind the wall, which also will lead to failure. So these type of walls will drain more freely, and they're also a little more flexible in terms of adapting to changes in soil conditions out there. These would likely be considered and shown in the final MVP grant. And the other idea is they're turnkey solutions. So depending on the availability of funding, the town could choose to implement them piecemeal. They're very flexible as far as construction, being able to work in that constrained environment in people's backyards. Excuse me. Sidegate has been a contentious issue with many. These are just some pictures of the existing Tidegate as it is there now. I would note in the pictures on the right show more the size of that Tidegate, and the top one kind of in the background there, you can see the Tidegate relative to the current opening of the culvert. It is a severe restriction in flow, and with the crest of the Tidegate, which you see where the water line is, that effectively blocks a good portion of the existing flow capacity of the culvert that you have out there now. So just wanted to point out that it's a restriction and it causes the upstream flooding at the lower storms. If you have anything greater than a 25-year storm, the Tidegate really is non-functional. It just overtops and flows into Sawmill Brook. The next slide, please. With the modeling and the data collection that we did under the MET grant, we plugged that back into our hydrology model and the hydraulics model to better understand what was happening at the 25-year event. We chose a 25 because that's also the design storm required by Mass DOT for the Central Street Bridge crossing itself. In this we compared the Tidegate closed, Tidegate open, with then our proposed bridge crossing as far as what the capacity and what the floodplain would look like for a 25-year upstream of the crossing itself. Many people probably can't see, and it's almost insignificant, but in the lower portion of the watershed just above Central Street, there's a couple of tiny slivers of red. That represents the difference in Tidegate open and Tidegate closed. With the Tidegate open, or closed rather, those red areas would flood. When it's open, it's the full yellow boundary. The new crossing, which includes removing of the Tidegate and opening to about a 20-foot wide span, reduces the horizontal extent of flooding from the yellow limits back to the green. So really is demonstrating a significant drop in what you can see from a horizontal extent of flooding with the new structure and the greater hydraulic capacity. Don't really want to go into a lot more detail, but I'll be glad to answer questions. It gets pretty technical with a lot of these as far as including sea level rise and those, but the general message I wanted to convey is with the new structure, there's a significant reduction at the 25-year. The 100-year, largely unchanged, because this is not so much a flood mitigation project for that level of storm. Next slide, Craig. Just a little bit more information on the bridge restoration project, which is what the town is funding for now. For folks in the room here, the limits of the project are in the upper right. We're looking to remove the existing culvert. It would expand to the full width of the crossing on the upstream side, continuing straight through, removing the Tidegate. And we've got a lot of utilities, area utilities, underground utilities, traffic impacts, pedestrians, all of those weigh into type of structure and capacity of the structure that we're trying to place in that location. The down in the lower left is just a quick little rendering that was done initially for the grant that shows the Tidegate removed and reconstructing the seawall with a clear opening for additional hydraulic capacity underneath. Some of the details being worked out on that are the architectural finish for the new bridge and the guardrail system across the top. But the general idea is it will be a much wider opening with the Tidegate removed. We looked quickly, some idea what happens with the Tidegate removed. Upstream, the red line is showing where these cross sections were taken. It's really at the mouth of where the Sawmill Brook opens up into Central Pond. The main point here I was trying to demonstrate is the difference in water elevation. High tide remains largely the same as you would expect. Over Tidegate today, and in the future it would still remain the same. The lower line though there, which you see is the low tide from the top to the bottom cross section, shows a significant drop in the low tide elevation, so that the tide gate is not holding that water back in the pond that it currently does now. So some of the properties would drain off better, and you wouldn't have that higher level of water on a more regular basis with the tide gate. It's a little more engineering information, but I think it helps to convey what I'm saying with the capacity of culvert. The upper left-hand corner is what we call a stage discharge curve. The top line demonstrates the current conditions. The bottom dashed line is the future condition with the new bridge structure. And what it's showing there is, as you go up on the left axis, the vertical axis, that shows head, and across the bottom axis is flow. So as you increase the head, which is your height of the water elevation, your flow will increase. But with a dotted line at a lower elevation, we're getting much greater flow capacity. And it's also summarized in the table, which again demonstrates that taking out the tide gate, enlarging the structure, we're passing a greater volume of water at a lower elevation. So lower elevation of water upstream in Central Pond. Kind of driving that home again, but the dotted arch represents, as in the earlier photos, the existing culvert. The gray box, the larger gray box, demonstrates the tide gate and how much of the culvert is blocked by that current tide gate. And then the smaller gray box within that, that's a little bit darker gray, represents the existing tide gate. So just visually looking at it, that represents your flow capacity out there today, how much of it is restricted. The larger opening there with the darker gray represents where the new culvert is and the additional capacity that will be afforded with a new structure. Again, passing more flow more rapidly. You're still going to have your tides flowing through the culvert, raising up in Central Pond on the other side. But when the tide goes out, there'll be less restriction there and it will flow out much more rapidly. Same thought process when you have inland storms, they're not going to be restricted by the smaller openings that will drain through Sawmill. Upstream of Sawmill Brook, there are still several structures along the brook that are undersized and under capacity. So those are still going to cause flooding further upstream. This will only address that first section. So I just want to make sure that people understand upstream, the hydrologic and hydraulic conditions remain as they will today until further improvements are made.
Why is it 6 foot 4 inches on the height from the stream bed to the down of the culvert? So 6 foot. Am I reading correctly? 6 foot 4.
Yeah.
Why is it 6 foot 4?
We're limited by the bedrock that's out there in the culvert now underneath it. So, and trying to go any deeper would be for blasting bedrock that's underneath it.
I guess I was curious about the other way. Is there a minimum requirement for the road surface?
It's not so much there is a minimum requirement, but we can put different types of deckings and different bridge construction that would minimize that. The real issue is the utility bays that are over top of the existing culvert and underneath the road with pavement. There's a number of underground utilities that are buried in that section that we have to maintain a corridor to pass those.
So that's the maximum height we could achieve. That's if we're going to build this thing.
Yeah. We're also constrained, if you didn't have, there's adjacent buildings adjacent to it with pedestrian access as well. So you've got ADA compliance to be addressing with grades. We can't alter the vertical profile very much. The approaches in and out from a traffic perspective that cause very limited alteration. So, and Elm Street is right there as well. So it really is combined as far as what you can do with grades and matching existing conditions at that location. So really fast and high level, but I was intending to really more focus on Central Street. And if we talk further about that, the idea there, we were asked at the last meeting, we presented all the options. And it really needs a town decision to decide what are we going to submit for permitting plans under the MVP grant. That only gets you through the permitting, and then I know the town's looking for additional funding, additional programs as to where the project is going to go forward from that point on.
Thank you very much. Very helpful. Questions from the board?
So
Well, initial, right?
Yeah.
Eli?
So, first, a detailed question, which may not really be super useful here. You mentioned the guardrail and that you're still into some thought process about the replacement of the guardrail. What, if any, detail do you have there?
Well, with regard, this is a Mass DOT bridge, so we have to adhere to their crash standard ratings for the guardrail. What's out there now with that pipe rail and the chain link is not suitable. It's not crash worthy. So we've been looking at different alternatives. We've even, through the town, approached the Historic Commission to make sure that if there's any preferences there on architectural finish, on guardrail finishes, treatment, as to what we can do there. We also need to wrap it around the Elm Street corner for crash worthiness at that location as well.
So you're talking principally about the chain link side.
Both sides.
Both sides. Okay, there was a CPC project, I think, a couple of years ago where we did authorize replacing a bunch of that guardrail, and the thinking at the time was, don't worry, we'll be able to reuse that.
So we put that off.
Yeah.
So we basically put that on hold and wait until this design is complete.
Okay, good. Second question. For the three different options, for stream versus pond or versus riffles, maintenance on those different options, there's different levels of maintenance required. I understand that the construction versus the maintenance might have different impacts to permitting. There's, when you're doing the construction, you have different agencies you have to do permitting with. Is there any implications with respect to what agencies, local, state, or federal, need to be involved for the maintenance across the three different options? So is there a difference, for example, if you select the pond option and you do maintenance there, does it cause you to have to get permitting from additional non-local agencies?
In order of complexity, feasibility, oversight, and maintenance, the natural stream is the easiest, lowest, least oversight, up to the impoundment. That low-level impoundment would have the greatest agency oversight and probably more resistance from many agencies. The low level, there's been talk that it would actually need a dam permit because you're impounding water behind it. So, and the same with the riffles. We did have several of the agencies at some of our earlier permits, and that was expressed, which would mean continued oversight by additional state agencies, not so much the federal agencies. Once these projects are in place, the federal agency, for the most part, would be Army Corps of Engineers.
For the initial construction?
Yeah, due to the, not necessarily for the natural stream. It depends on how much material
Right.
would be removed. That concept, the thought process there was by removing the tide gate, it would naturally restore a stream channel. The intervention would come into play with management of potential invasive species that we'd want to make sure that they weren't involved in the revegetation of the upland, or not upland, but the wetland areas adjacent to the stream, as well as the fallwag, which is the deepest part of the channel, doesn't meander too close to one side or the other to protect private property.
Okay, and then the riffle and the pond options might or would incur additional state oversight.
It's likely
For
they
maintenance.
would. It was likely they would, because with both of those, we expect you to have some sediment deposition on the upstream side over time, much like the current pond has settled in with deposition sediments from the watershed. So as you remove those, on a periodic basis, those would require recurring interaction with the state and federal agencies.
Okay, that's all I have for you.
And so with that, the fallway, do you have to periodically clean that out? I mean, if you're getting sediment elsewhere, won't you get sediment here as well?
The idea with most natural streams is you have your high water events, which naturally start to flush it. So there would really be minimal maintenance, if any, required to keep that channel open. As it's a natural process. As it does start to, low flows for an extended period, yes, you're going to start to get deposition. Then you'll have an inland storm of a magnitude, and it will flush it clean.
Okay. And I did have one other question about your, the 25-year frequency storm event. You showed the picture overlay of the green, yellow, and red. And in the packet we received, it's on page 6. My question is, it shows, when it says the green for the proposed conditions, it shows much less inundation in where the current pond is, but does it show more uphill of it?
No, upstream, as I
Upstream,
mentioned,
thank
you
you.
start to get into those other culvert sections, so it's unchanged.
So that's unchanged. Okay,
Because,
I just wanted
yeah,
to-
those are
yeah.
impacted by the inland storms coming in, and those are currently constrained, so there's really no impact or change with those.
Thank you.
This is a really ignorant question, but the funding for this, where is that coming from? I didn't understand from the description. I see costs, and is that assumed that that's something that we have to figure out how to come up with, or is the idea that that comes through additional grants?
Currently, all the work has been funded through grants. The next construction portion of it has not been identified.
Is it feasible to do it through grants, or is that something that the town would need to figure out how to pay for?
There are restoration grants, and the agencies, based on the town's interest in restoring it, have expressed an interest in participating in future activities construction. Because you're reestablishing the sea trout passage through there, so there is a strong interest in continued funding for this.
And is that funding usually the full amount, or is that usually a town portion and a grant typically when you see these situations?
They do run the gamut. Many of them do require a small portion for a town match, some do not, and some of that depends on which option you choose to pursue. That's where I was alluding to a little bit with an impoundment. It's unlikely that any of the agencies would support that because it doesn't achieve some of the primary goals that they're looking to achieve with the project.
This is like a non-tied, I'm just curious about when you, just from your professional perspective, when you look at the effects of a 25-year plus flood, if you are a property owner in any of those areas, would you be concerned about your property?
This is only showing the 25 and the 100.
I'm being generous
floods
by
is-
asking only about
yeah,
the 25.
yeah.
I'm not gonna ask about the 100.
Yes. And, we've been out there and even during the geotech program, trying to find access and find suitable locations due to the wetness of the properties. They are, the high tide, the king tide events are flooding the properties now. They're overtopping the retaining wall.
Like, I guess one of the things I'm interested in the way this goes forward, and it's always been kind of a lingering question, I think even since this was first presented, is to what degree have we really adequately engaged all the property owners? I know that we've had open forums, and I know we've made notifications in public ways through the cricket and whatnot, but this isn't tied to your proposal. This is just a reaction to what I'm seeing in total. It just seems like we're dealing with something that has tremendous aesthetic question, which is, I think right now the discussion's focused on that. I just see a huge impact to residents.
Yeah, the flooding question is something that the project is only can address at that lower storm level where
Right, I totally
the
get that.
25-year more frequent events, you will see some marginal benefit from the project.
Right. That's
Larger,
why I guess I'm just trying to.
larger events, 100-year.
Yeah, no, I clearly get
so
it from the.
The public engagement, though, I know the town, through Greg's office and Mary O'Reilly, the grants administrator, has reached out consistently for these
Yeah.
to try to. I think I don't
I'm not-
know behind
yeah,
me, but
I'm
there's
not criticizing any
No,
individual effort. As a town, we always are trying to do more, and I don't know if I were to go knock on some doors whether or not people had any clue about this.
no the feedback that we've received too, and I'm sure you'll hear more if I'm overlooking something, but the tide gate, its function, and the potential protection of upstream properties and the maintenance of that water level upstream was a concern voiced by many.
Yeah.
And the other is the flooding impacts. It seems like we're spending money, we're doing a project, and it's not helping my property, is a comment that I'm hearing a lot.
So I guess what is relevant to what's being presented here, just to bring my comments back, and I know we're short on time, is that concern affects my enthusiasm for pursuing these more aesthetic considerations. If I'm concerned that as a town, we've got risk that is significant, and we're debating interesting things here, but it seems like we've got a bigger problem around.
The do-nothing alternative will only exacerbate the
Oh, yeah, I'm
problem
not
as
saying
you
we
go
do nothing.
forward.
Yeah.
The sediment buildup upstream of the culvert the culvert itself, the retaining walls, all of those kind of go hand in hand and just are going to continue to exacerbate the flooding problem.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying we don't do nothing. I'm just saying that I'm looking at $500,000 for option number 3, and the town is probably going to have to contribute to that, and we've got a much bigger risk question. So just that just doesn't jive for me.
A technical question might be outside of the scope of this, but I'm assuming the upstream flooding, which is unmitigated by this, is due to the culvert underneath School Street, which is limited in size.
Yes.
Can you offhand answer is there capacity in that structure to increase the size of that culvert? I know it's not in the scope of this project. To increase the size of that culvert that would in fact provide mitigation to the upstream flooding.
The answer to your question is in the earlier modeling that we did. There is a study and a report.
So the answer is yes. There's the physically it's possible to put a larger culvert on both the school and the Norwood crossings
Okay.
to gain some modest improvement to the flooding.
Different project, different funding source.
Yeah, it was all investigated in one of the earlier projects that did take the whole watershed and look at each one of those crossings.
Yep.
So that information is here in town.
That's a very good point. I mean, I think that's where you come back to the dollars, like $500,000 on a modest effect for multiple property owners versus $500,000 for affecting, only the area close to the culvert that we're talking about. I mean, I think that's the type of thing where we look at the whole problem.
We need
Part
to
of that-
start at the downstream end and work your way up, and because fixing the upstream
Yeah.
has no
Well, if grants are paying
immediate.
for it, then I'm all for it. But if we're paying for it,
Yeah.
we got an obligation to the people that actually produce the money for the town.
Yeah, and as part of the full watershed study, we actually looked at options of holding back water on the other side of 128. And there weren't good options for doing that, to try to slow water coming down the whole Sawmill Brook before it even gets to the built-up area. But that was looked at.
Okay, any other points from the board? No? Okay. I will open up for, if anybody has a specific comment to this topic on this presentation, I'm happy to hear from any residents or folks that are nearby. Tonight, what we're doing is listening. We're going to give some direction in terms of what we'd like to see. We'll come back to this again on the 19th just to make sure. So if anybody has any comments particular to this, if you could just pass the mic back and we can share it, that would be great.
Construction of this 20 by 6 culvert, would that be an open cut, or would it be jacked, or would the road have to be closed?
You just identify yourself.
Ron Master Giacomo, 9 Mascanoma.
The proposed new structure will be an open cut, and we're currently looking at removal and then open cut with probably a precast structure to help speed up construction.
So the road would be closed.
Yes, the road, currently we're looking at a shutdown of the road, trying to minimize that shutdown to get it back open, at least for one lane of traffic while additional work goes on in that area.
And can they ship a 20-foot by 10-foot box culvert on the streets?
The actual structure would come in a series of segments. They're typically about 4 feet wide, and they line up together, so they're pieces that you actually assemble together.
Peggy Coleman, 20 Friends Street. I'm missing the word, so when I look at all these pictures, I'm missing the seasons, the changes that this water will go through during the seasons. And I'm remembering in the winter time, maybe 45 years ago, when we used to be able to skate on the pond, and it was great fun. So I'm looking for the winter picture, not just I think it looks like a totally green picture of what's going to happen, but what's going to happen to this, to all these changes in the fall, in the winter, in the spring. So I would like to see, I'm speaking to public access, that it would be nice if we reclaimed some of this space during the winter when we don't have a lot of public space where we can enjoy the town in the wintertime. And except for having problems with the hockey players at that time, it was great fun and it brought the town together. So I'd like us to look at this, these changes, not just from the green time of the year, but the other times of the year. And so the word that I was looking for, and because of senior moments, I've forgotten, but we always used to talk about, when the wetlands. So I haven't heard the word wetlands tonight. And yet all the time that I've lived here, which is more than 50 years, the word wetlands was always included in any discussion that we had about Central Pond. So where is the word wet? Are the wetlands still an issue for this project, as well as public access? Those are my 2 points. Thank you.
Great. Any other comments?
Hi, Ben Coburn, a butter on the pond at Powder House and below the culvert at Peel House. And my question is the larger opening going to create a significantly stronger current that is hitting the seawalls on the harbor side of the road? The right side is private.
Needs a microphone.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I understand when you think of a larger opening versus the small, but the water flows are unchanged. So with a larger opening, the velocities are actually reduced because you're having the same volume of water passing through a larger opening. So the velocity drops to pass the same flow. So it actually should help any velocity concerns in that regard. We're also discharging many hours of the day into a tidal current that's going the other way, which also offsets your velocities.
Okay, great. Anybody else? Okay. If anyone has any comments or are there any future questions, please let's funnel those back through to Greg's office. And Chuck, I don't know, do you have anything else you want to add to this? You're good? Okay. So what I would look for the 19th in reference to Arthur's comments and those from the board, sort of a summary recommendation based on the groups that we work with, the stream team, feedback from our professionals relative to this in terms of options and choices. I think looking and understanding how the broader context will be addressed is important. And I do want to punctuate Arthur's comment about citizen engagement in the community abutters, making sure they're very clear about what's going on and decisions that we'll make around that. So with that, I think we're all set. And thank you very much for your time tonight.
Thank you, and thank you for the public participation.
Yes, thank you. Okay. All right, we're running a little bit late here, so. Planning board. Thank you.
She did a post Literally every day. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, go quick.
Yeah, no,
Hurry up. Hurry up. Go ahead. We're going to pause for 2 minutes just to get ourselves squared away here. Anybody from the planning board, if you want to come up towards the front, I know Lisa's here, come on up front. Anybody can grab a chair? Okay, great. So thank you to the planning board members that are here. I don't know if you're a posted meeting tonight. Do you need to call to order?
No.
No, not posted? Okay, good. That's fine. You did? Oh, okay, so. Good idea. Okay. Yeah, so you can you take some, just add our minutes in there? Okay, just identify. Okay, we'll catch him, don't worry. Okay, So the purpose of tonight is to talk about where we are relative to the master plan and going forward with implementation. So in March 2015, there was an initial charge from the Board of Selectmen with the Planning Board to advance a master plan project, which was going to look at sort of the town's vision and the topics that we needed to cover and care for under 7 key topics, such as economic development, sustainability, environmental, land use, facilities planning, all the different topics that are kind of taken care of in the master plan. The master plan committee came together, did that work over the course of 4 years, which we swore were going to take us 2, but it took us 2 years longer than that, and have a draft master plan in place today. That has been reviewed and vetted in various forums, but we're now at a point where the master plan committee has disbanded because the work that they've done is complete. The planning board now is at a point of taking over the plan relative to adopting it as they're going forward, sort of outline of what they'd like to do and use. And tonight's meeting is just to sort of formally kick that off and talk a little bit about the planning board's perspective and the board of selectmen in terms of what issues need to be addressed, can be addressed. There's been a lot of back and forth relative to that. What other kinds of things would you like to see relative to happen before adoption of the plan to make sure that you're getting everything that you need answered? But more importantly, how are we going to implement this going forward? And tonight is not about figuring that out. Tonight is about setting forward a framework that says conceptually, here's how we will do this. Some of the answers we have may be answered tonight, or questions we have may be answered in terms of how boards and committees will interact. Others we'll have to do some more research on. So with that said, I'd like to sort of turn it to the board and the planning board to have a quick joint discussion relative to where we are with the master plan and your adoption of that. I know you have a meeting coming up in a week or two, next week. Where are we relative to doing that? What do we need to close the gap? And what are some next steps? And I think that you may have some ideas on that. So if people want to start with that, that's great. Do you want to take a microphone? Anybody want to?
Well, our chairman, I don't think that you gotta speak up.
Here, we need to use the microphone.
I think we may be slightly unprepared for this now that I hear what you had planned. Our chairman is not here this evening,
Okay.
and I don't think any of us thought. Okay, maybe we could kick something off, but it
That's
may
fine.
not be very organized.
That's fine.
On the master plan committee. I think the planning board. The master plan committee has done a tremendous amount of work. Just one of the downfalls that I have seen about it, that us as a voted, elected board have not had any feedback per se directly. So what I was proposing, I think there's a lot of issues and concerns that haven't been brought to the planning board directly. So I am proposing hosting that we have a public hearing as a planning board so people can come to the planning board, express their concerns, we can deliberate it as a planning board and go forward. So I actually put the notice in the paper. So tonight that we could potentially decide to put something in the paper tomorrow so we could get this clock going and rolling.
And so when would you like to have that happen? Do you think?
So actually, Sue and I have been working on a draft date, and I think the date might be March 4th, if I'm wrong. Does that sound right, Sue?
Sue Brown? March
That
4th?
sound right? I think that's 2 meetings out. So if we
Okay.
get something into the paper on Friday, that gives us 2 meetings, and then a vote, which would be 3 meetings out. The exact dates, don't quote me on those at this point. But that was open meeting law.
Yeah.
I had some conversations with Sue about that to get this rolling.
Yep. Okay. That's good.
My major concern came out of the open house where I was there representing a station of housing, and there was conversations going on the other side of the room that I, as a member of the planning board, wasn't made aware of until almost a month later. So I feel it's important as the board that we give the public this opportunity.
Sir? Any other?
Hi, I'm Mary Foley, Planning Board. I agree with all that was said, and that We are still working through questions that we have with the master plan. I think how it went from the vision report to the FEMA report and how things came about in the master plan. I'm not seeing always a direct connection. Ocean Street is an example that, I read the 2012 FEMA report and the 2018, and I'm just wondering how Ocean Street popped on the master plan. So there's still even open questions on our end.
Okay. Lauren, do you-
Connie Sullivan. I guess I'm a little taken back because to me this was billed as a meeting where we were going to talk about checks and balances, oversight, implementation. So I think it's important that we hear from the Board of Selectmen how they intend to provide oversight to the master plan.
That's what the purpose of this meeting is in terms of implementation, and we have some ideas relative to that. But I think my biggest concern, number one, before we even get to a lot around implementation, because it's about controls and oversights and all those different pieces. The way the master plan is set up is that each grouping of recommendations will be cared for by a group, a department, a committee, or board. They will be integrated across all of the town relative to our budgeting season, the way that we look at implementing all of the work and setting priorities, and that we'll work together on goals that are integrated across on that. The planning board has the overview relative to the pieces of the planning of the town. It's your plan, and it's worked with the town planner. But the details of how the implementation will happen is what we want to do in concert with you, and to understand what's important in terms of requirements for oversight and how they're going to work. So the purpose of tonight was to kick that discussion off. Okay, so the clarity around that. But before we even get to a lot of implementation, we have to accept the plan and make sure that we're comfortable with what's in it. So I wanted to make sure that we had all that together. Now, in fairness, when we launched this plan 4 years ago, we asked for a planning board member to be members of the master plan committee. And we had some representation. Andrea was there a little bit, Ron, and frankly, had a few people. There was not consistent representation from the planning board on the master plan committee. And I know we've talked about this before. It's very hard to do catch up, particularly when there's new members who are just getting up to speed. So we want to take the time and make sure people are there. But we also had to continue with the work that we had with updates that were provided through the town planner and different meetings to allow this process to move forward. So in fairness to the people that did the work and have that, there was a lot of implementation or a lot of discussion around the topics in the master plan that weren't necessarily connected with the planning board because they were in abstention. So I just want to be clear that we want to make this work. We're now looking forward. We want to map out, I think the idea of having a public hearing is a good one. I think any other comments you have relative to that is important, but this job needs to get done and it needs to get done soon. So that's sort of where we are with that piece of it. The implementation is going to take some time, and we want to make sure we get that right because we have to communicate with our community, not through a 60-page plan, but through a very clear stated statement of here are the recommendations, the process, the oversight, the pieces that we're using to implement this master plan. But we need to make sure that we have a master plan in place and that's accepted by the planning board before that happens. So that's just some context and background. Any other comments from our board? No?
Is that I think the role of the town planner started out a few years ago as part-time, which has evolved into an almost full-time, and trying to describe now the role as a full-time person and our role between. I think we've tried to get some ideas from Greg, how this is roles and responsibilities. I guess seeing that on paper and what's expected of both sides would be a great start.
Well, and I totally agree. And I think part of that is the town planner sitting down with the planning board and sorting out what, in fact, those roles need to be and how they need to move forward. I look at the role, and we have, recommendations relative to how we work with our town administrator. She is an administrative arm of the planning board. The way you communicate, how frequently you communicate, and what you use each other's time with does need to be defined a little bit better. I agree with that. But I do think that that's something that the town planner and the planning board should look at in conjunction with whatever feedback we can give. No? Any other input points? No?
But I'm just curious. I see you hesitating and like you want to say more on that.
I guess maybe not at the moment. When someone's trying to describe like roles and responsibilities, I'm not necessarily sure it's that person's. I don't know. I'm looking for something more formal. What's expected above from you, from Greg,
So we can provide that. We have
from some
a
checks and
pretty,
balances. I don't think that's.
right.
I
So we
don't
have a
think
pretty
there's a
good job description that lays that out. Certainly, we can have discussions at your next meeting or following. You tell me when you can schedule that.
I think that's part of this, and we've been waiting for that, and it's frustrating not getting what that role that we are expected to be going forward. I think particularly, maybe the plan, the land use plan of the town. I mean, what information we're going to be privy to, what we're not going to be privy to. I mean, do you just want to have developers come in and come up with overlay plans and we're just gonna stamp them? It's confusing where we fit in at this point because there was no town planner 4 years ago and now there is. So we need to figure this out as a planning board, as a board of selectmen, I mean, all together.
I agree. And I think starting with the job responsibilities, the role and responsibilities of which Sue is getting measured on relative to a town planner, working with the planning board, understanding where that sits and what your role is in response to that. You know, I look at the master plan, and this has been the labor of love for a lot of people, is it's a reboot point. It's time to turn the page and think about how we do our business. I can tell you in the years sitting here as chair of this board, some things I've learned really importantly are number one is that we have to have better oversight. We have to have better communication with our constituents. We need to get the public engaged even better. We need to make sure that our boards and committee understand their roles and responsibilities, not just in their own group, but cross-functionally. There's a lot of work that needs to happen here. So I want to make sure that we do this going forward. And if we can do this through the planning board as a starting point, it's something that we can model as we look at all of our other boards and committees. So it's really important work. So I think getting this as a point of starting to say, let's start with the job descriptions, understand roles and responsibilities, understand what's needed in the master plan in order for you to get to the next step, have the public hearing, and then really begin to sit down and craft what we need to do to implement this correctly and get that information out to the public in a consumable way is really important. Makes
I
sense?
think to your point, the fact that land use in the town does come under the purview of the planning board. That's your question about who does what,
Yeah.
or wanting the clarification is germane, very germane.
Of course.
Who decides what is the purview of the planning board? And I mean, if it's going to be changed, who has the authority to change that?
Well, it's an elected office, so it's not, it's set
Well,
under.
the purview is
MGL.
pretty well spelled out in state statutes. And we can review that just to make sure everyone understands what those parameters are. That's probably a good place to start. And then obviously there are some other areas that you have some flexibility on, and we can talk about those as well. So,
The bigger picture for me is if we're going to be making overlays, there has to be a reason to make the overlay. And so are we going to be brought into that conversation ahead of time, or is it going to be, this is what we need and this is what's going to happen in the LCD? I think that's where we're feeling a little disconnected.
Disconnected, but the answer is the planning board's responsible for that. So I think, at the end of the day, this is the discussion point that we need to have.
I just need to add that we've been asking for that type of thing, and we're just not getting it, and that's part of the issue.
Okay.
All of those things discussed.
Okay, well,
When you
now-
say ask, who did you ask?
Town planning.
And just out of curiosity, I'm like completely ignorant as to the reasons why. Why is the head of the planning board not here?
I don't know.
Just a schedule thing or just a schedule? as the head of the planning board share the sentiments that you're expressing? Like, are you, you have a unified position on this, or is this?
I believe we're unified on most of what we're talking about. I mean, we haven't taken a poll or anything. So,
No, yeah, and I don't know,
Oh, no, there's no agenda to my question. I'm just trying to understand the situation, how we move forward. Literally, like, it's, I think if there's like a consolidated point of view or concern, then we can focus on that. I think.
I think there's just an effort to get weekly updates, summary of meetings and discussions, and we're just kind of left in the dark. And so we do a lot of searching around, and that's not productive.
Okay, so going forward, if we plan to have the meeting that lays out the statute relative to planning board responsibilities, the role of the town planner, communication, the way you want to work together, how all that comes together, that should set the groundwork for that, in addition to the other pieces that we talked about.
Yes, and I've been asking for that for
Okay,
the
I
past 6
understand,
weeks.
but thank you. But we understand that now as a group, and I think the mandate has been made, so thank you. Any other comments from the planning board?
Just on schedule.
Yes.
We've received now a draft final master plan,
Mhm.
and there's still comments. We're still making comments. Now we're talking about a public hearing. Is there kind of mandated deadline on when this, when you want to adopt this? Or?
Well, we were thought we were doing it on January 14th, in fairness, but understood, and the deadline that Peter, your chair, had set was for the end of this month, so you could vote it next week. It sounds like that now has been moved out. So I am looking to the planning board, number one, to be comfortable, but in a reasonable time frame to get this completed. And if in fact you feel that one of these pieces of getting it done and agree as a board is to have a public hearing, I totally support that. But I would look for a final answer within fairly short order of that meeting so that we can close this and move on. There's a lot of things, gating factors here that we already have moving and thinking about. So I would say by mid-March at the latest. If you're having a meeting on the 4th, right?
I think one of the concerns that some of the board has, and you just alluded to it, that there are things already in the works that we don't necessarily know about, and that, for instance, White Beach, which all of a sudden comes to us because it was said, oh, it's in the master plan, and we haven't approved the master plan, and it's like we're being asked to take it out of the master plan. So I guess, you know, when you talk about transparency, you know, we're saying, you know, I mean, sure, you can do job descriptions and talk about the roles of the planning board, but the bottom line is, what exactly is any oversight over the master plan? Can a department head just go and do something and then all of a sudden it's done? Or, you know, I think there's a few pieces like that that concern us, and the whole White Beach thing brought it to a head before we voted. So that's why I think a number of us kind of pulled back and said, we're going to be the point people on this master plan, and we just need to make sure that there's checks and balances, that there's oversight, and it doesn't necessarily mean that we're the oversight or what have you, but that there needs to be something.
Well, I think, and I agree with you 100%. I think there needs to be some leadership from the planning board at this point to connect with us and come up with those solutions. Because at the end of the day, you know, I use this analogy a lot. We've been rewiring while the headlights are on. We had to continue town business regardless of, you know, waiting for a master plan to be done. So things that were underway, for example, Ocean Street was a project that was pulled from a report and an adoption of an emergency plan that we had, or what was the name of it again?
Hazard mitigation.
Hazard mitigation, thank you. And that was just done in the course of business. And we're going to talk about Ocean Street in a few minutes. But my point being is that people were doing their jobs in terms of following through on this. It did raise questions and issues around implementation, around decisions, around priorities. It's our job now to deal with that going forward. But I would like to see the planning board engaged at the level of helping us sort through that. I think it's really important that you own it, that you're accountable for it, just like we need to be accountable for oversight. And that's the reason I want to make sure you're comfortable with the plan. But at the end of the day, the results do need to sit in your lap relative to that. So I don't think we should tell you what it should be. You're there as the planning board elected officials. It's your responsibility to help sort that out. We can be partners, love to do that, want to support all of it, but we need the leadership from the group as well to make that happen. So in answer to your question, as soon as we can get to it, but I want to make sure I don't want to force a function for an irrational reason. Okay, that's my 2 cents on that. Any other points from the board?
Yeah, I guess I'd like to clarify one thing about the master plan. The master plan didn't alter the structure of the town government. The master plan is intended to be just that, a plan that provides guidelines for how we should be setting our priorities and how we should be directing our efforts to modify policy to further the goals of the plan and the town overall. So there's no change to the governmental structure that suddenly makes one department able to do something that they could not otherwise have done before. It just sets down a bunch of guidelines for priorities for the most part. So I just wanted to clarify that one point.
Anything else? Planning board, anything? Any other comments? All right, so your next meeting will work for those things. Greg and Sue need to get that information to you, and you can post for your public hearing, and we'll stay in touch. You probably need to vote. Okay.
Can we do this right now?
Yep,
Gail
go ahead.
needs to
Gail
take the minutes.
will take the minutes.
I'd like to make a motion to set the dates to be determined by the clerk to hold a public hearing regarding the master plan to start in the paper on Friday. But I don't want to be quoted to the exact dates. It will be on the paper on Friday. That will be the first posting. So wherever the dates fall after that.
So Friday, February 8th. It'll be in the paper Friday, February 8th?
Yes.
Okay.
But
I'm
the
just-
2 weeks.
Yeah, I'm just confirming, okay.
We ha- Hmm? I believe it's March 4th.
Okay.
And we will post 2 weeks, and then we'll have the hearing, which I believe is one meeting, and then we will vote the following meeting.
Okay. Just make sure Gail has all your names so she can quote who's here.
I'll give it to her.
Raise your hand. Okay, great, thank you. All right. Okay, well, we're running 18 minutes off schedule, which isn't too bad. Thank you very much, you guys. We'll stay in touch. All right, the next topic we have is the White Beach discussion. And Greg, I'm going to ask you to tee us up on that. And anybody will certainly have some open for public comment and any questions. There's some extra seats
There are
here.
extra seats if people want to sit down.
Okay. Oops. Gives everybody attention. Wake up. Okay. All right, Greg.
So, sure, we'll start off with that. Actually, before getting into the specifics of White Beach and Ocean Street, I actually think tonight's meeting as a meeting and the agenda is instructive of some of our challenges. So we started off with swearing in some public safety officers. We had a critique of a devastating fire, had a good detailed description of a major construction project that's coming down the pike with Sawmill Brook and the culvert here. Talked about town meeting and petition articles, et cetera. So it always seems like the plate is overflowing, and there's always more to do than time to do it in. And I'm reminded of a comment my father was always fond of saying. I don't know how politically correct it is, but he always used to say he's busier than a one-armed paper hanger. And it definitely feels that way sometimes. So we do the best we can, and we're trying, and we're open to guidance and course corrections as we go forward. And I think this the Ocean Street White Beach project is a case in point in terms of needing some course correction. So our efforts to anticipate sea level rise and its impact on the town has been ongoing. It really dates back some 5 years. And we've identified some of our key vulnerable areas, certainly where we're sitting, the sewer plant, further out by Masconomo and around the harbor. Further west, out by the marshes, past Boardman Avenue, going the other direction, eastward, you have Ocean Street and certainly have Raymond Street. So we pursued mitigation plans for Sawmill Brook. You heard a lot about that this evening. We have identified plans for this building and for the sewer plant to better waterproof those buildings as well. So those are ongoing. We have some additional grants that we're applying for to fund those efforts as we go forward. We even have a very, very conceptual, but nonetheless it's an idea of solving a lot of our problems from here to Masco, et cetera, with a potential storm barrier at the mouth of the harbor. It's an enormous project, but it would solve a lot of problems with one big project. So it's certainly worth continuing to investigate. It's not something that's going to happen tomorrow. Probably doesn't happen for 30 years, but it's something that we might want to start having a public conversation about sooner rather than later. So we haven't advanced plans for Raymond Street area or Ocean Street. Those aren't the highest priority areas, and we should focus on those higher priority areas as we move forward. Sort of an opportunistic situation. The Bar Foundation gave some funding to MAPC to help towns advance some of their resiliency planning. In talking to the funders, we don't always compete that well for grants because of our small size. And so we often have to look at unique angles to our grant proposals. And so they were anxious to advance the concept of the living shoreline. And we said, well, we think we have an area that might be suitable for that. And so we did submit the application last end of November, 1st of December, for a study of White Beach. Now, clearly, in hindsight, that application was overzealous in its discussion of one option, and that was an abandonment of a portion of Ocean Street to recreate sort of the natural function of a barrier beach. And indeed, a title of the grant application itself was over the top and caused a lot of understandable concern with the public. Its intent was to look at three options, and it wasn't clear in that application as it should have been. The three options are do nothing, keep it the way it is, and see what happens. Second option would be to fortify that area, perhaps again, not tomorrow. None of these things have to happen tomorrow. I think I hope, tens of years, if not 30 years down the road. But I do think, just parenthetically, my bias is to have plans on the shelf ready If and when the time comes that something catastrophic happens, we've got a plan to pull off that shelf. Because if something happens and it catches us off guard, it's often hard to put back into place what is the preferred plan. We ran into that with the rotunda just last year. People are saying, well, shouldn't we think about, instead of just fixing it as it was, shouldn't we be raising it up while we're spending that money? So that's the real pressure. Get it done before the season starts, or not have it for a season or two while we take time and do a more in-depth plan. Would have been nice to have a plan on the shelf for that project. So in any case, certainly we could have done better on teeing that project up and perhaps avoided some of the understandable consternation and concerns that are out there today. The good news is that we can correct those mistakes. We have clarified the scope if we want to go forward. The funders are okay with that clarified scope. We can form a steering committee with strong representation from the neighborhood, as well as a broader representation of the town citizens. And we know that ultimately decisions to, if indeed the recommendation was this, I'm not saying the recommendation would be this, but if the recommendation is to abandon a road, that's a town meeting vote. So there's lots of hurdles ahead of us before we get there. But again, is White Beach,
And we're going to let him finish.
I'll be
first.
finished in just a minute. Sure.
I understand.
Yeah, I'll wrap it up in just a minute. Is it our most pressing concern? No, it's not. There are more pressing concerns that we should be advancing. Again, I think it is prudent to have a plan on the shelf at some point. Does it need to happen today? No, it doesn't. So with any luck, whatever plans we make, will sit on the shelf for a while because I don't think that the danger is imminent. So what do we do at this juncture? Basically, three options I see. One is to proceed with the modified or clarified scope of work with a citizen-centric committee to guide it. Secondly, we can try to negotiate a different project. I had a really good conversation with MAPC today. They are willing to consider an alternative study area. There's no guarantee that will happen, but I am hopeful that can happen, and I see that as a potential win-win here. We can redirect the funding so we don't have to turn away a gift horse in the mouth, but we can do an area that perhaps has more pressing needs and has more support of the community. I certainly favor that route as we try to go forward. Third, and maybe it's in conjunction with one or two, we take a bit of a step back. I still think we should proceed if we can get some funding to advance some of our studies. But let's make sure we have strong input, a strong sustainability committee that has a purview beyond what has been a focus on composting, recycling, et cetera, but helps us guide a real detailed plan of our priorities as we go forward and as we put plans in place. And I think they just need to be plans at this point, but put plans in place to make us prepared for higher sea levels and potential greater flooding in town. So I see those as the three options, and take it back to you.
Thanks. Before we go to the community, any board comments at this point?
So, no, I think I want to hear from the community.
Okay.
And then
Okay, so I know there's a lot of people who want to speak here tonight, and we want to hear from you. So number one, we'll ask you if you can just raise your hand, identify yourself, speak into the mic. We would love it if there's one topic that has been made and statement made already that we move on to other topics. We don't need to repeat things over and over if possible. And we would love to hear from everyone, but let's try to keep this in a 1 to 2 minute time frame for each person. If we need to go beyond that, we're happy to do that, but if we can move this along, that would be great. So I will open up for public comment, and you can raise your hand, and we'll go ahead. All right, was it Jessica? And then we'll go over here.
Hi, Jessica Lamoth, 21 Walker Road, Chair of the Coastal Stream Team, but that's not necessarily, I'm not speaking in that role. I have been on the Coastal Resilience Advisory Group for, I guess, if it's 5 years. And what has made me most proud of Manchester about that is that we have tried to be very forward-thinking, and climate change is coming. We have a lot of vulnerable areas, and I am very much in favor. I loved Greg's expression of plan on the shelf. I'm a planner. I like to know if there's a plan, not that just an emergency has happened and we're reacting. With that said, I really hope that the Board of Selectmen will go forward with this grant. I think that we have been so lucky, or not lucky. Mary Riley's done a ton of work, and she's done a great job getting us an amazing amount of money to look at all of these things. And I don't know if there's any risk to getting future grants if we get things and then say, oh, wait, no, we've changed our minds. It's a study. Knowledge is power. Understanding what all of these three options would cost, what the environmental impact would be, everything. It just seems to me, why would you not do that? So I guess that's it.
Hi, I'm Steve Kelly, 355 Summer Street. I'd like to make 3 quick points. So we're the property owner that faces White Beach. And it's been unclear whether that was clear, that that's private property that the plan would, if implemented, open the ocean up to. And I know there was some emails about an alternate site is on private property. And so anyway, that's who we are. I know there's a question about, this is just a plan. Why is everybody so upset? And my observation is, you're really good at what you do. So there was a study to build a new high school. We have a new high school. There was a study to build a new elementary school, and we're getting a new elementary school. There's probably going to be Central Pond work done. It's what you're good at. So to say that it's just a study, that doesn't really appease a lot. We're not in favor of taking the money. And I'm reluctant to say that, don't take the money. I don't know that I've ever said that before, but it's a pretty rare thing. And the reason is, it's the wrong focus. So the remit in the hazard and mitigation plan, which I think was really well done, is determine options for preventing street washout by ocean surge and tidal flooding on Ocean Street. That's what the focus should be. When you set out a study, you create a frame, and you move things forward through that frame. So the concern is, Ocean Street's a complex environment, and this is a bit like whack-a-mole. If you change White Beach, what's the impact to Black Beach? What's the impact to our property? What's the impact to the East End? What's the public safety impact? This is very narrow, and it just reads like, although very well intentioned, is going off in the wrong direction and doesn't follow what the town developed. I think you should just follow your own plan. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ernst from Edge.
You'll go next, Brenda. It's okay. No, it's okay.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Go
You
ahead.
correct me. I need to sit down because
No, that's, you can absolutely sit down.
But I live on Crow Island. I'm Ernst from Edge, and my wife Gail is here. And my comments about the whole project are quite negative. First of all, I think it was presented to the town after it was already submitted. And the submission we discovered has a lot of errors in it and misstatements. And one question I would have is, has the MAPC been informed of the corrections, and have we been informed of what corrections have been made to these statements? I just read one. It says it's an important buffer zone to the Kettle Cove neighborhood in Manchester. Doesn't do anything for the Kettle Cove neighborhood in Manchester, I can tell you. And you don't have to be a scientist to tell you that. The other one is, I think, the town of Selectmen, admire the job you do, running the town and taking care of a lot of things. But your role is also to supervise the well-being of the citizens in Manchester. And I think at this point, especially in our area, we suffer from the fact that there's been a lot of misrepresentations made on behalf of an environmental project, which is basically driven by people from out of town. I'm sure the MEPC will love it, because once it's done, there will be a beautiful picture in the brochures of White Beach before and after. But for the citizens in Manchester, it will be a disaster because it takes away a very attractive walking opportunity in town. So I can go on and on. We've submitted quite a number of emails on this regard to you, and I would just warn you that the idea of having a bunch of plans on the shelf, I think, is a big mistake, because then you can do whatever you feel like later on without the people living then having an input. And so I would recommend you just pull this thing all together. There must be a temptation to say, well, this is just a study. But as Steve has made clear, once you start a study, it becomes a train that's in movement, and it's not easy to stop it. For everybody in Manchester, the White Beach is a low priority in terms of keeping the ocean out. There are much more important parts of town that need attention. And I'll shut up, I can go on for hours, but I would point out one thing is that I live on Crow Island, and so when the beach is installed, my only exit will be the culvert on Black Beach. And as the town head of the Department of Public Works has indicated to me, that part of Black Beach, of Ocean Street is very weak. And basically, we talked about it last year, and since I had 2 exits, I said, okay, I agree with you that we fix it when the whole thing collapses. If this is my only exit, I'll hire myself a coastal engineer, and I can tell you it's going to cost the town a fortune to repair that if that becomes my only exit. So that's the only warning I want to leave you with, that if you want to have a peaceful 2019, and I want to have a peaceful 2019, I would just shelve the project and do something else.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Brenda Furlong, 19 Ocean Street. I was counseled that the Board of Selectmen would like to know why they shouldn't do this study. So I've kind of reoriented my comments to address that, because I think it was a very wise suggestion. As I think about it, there are 3 prime reasons why we should not do this study. The first, as Greg alluded to, there was an email that's sent today, and it said, as a smaller community, we have trouble competing against large cities and towns for grants. Indications were that funding for a living shoreline study would be easier to obtain. The only other barrier beach where living shoreline makes sense is Gray Beach in Magnolia. The town does not own most of this beach, nor any of the land behind it. We've got exactly the same situation at White Beach. It is not just the Kellys that have private land abutting White Beach. There are other residents and organizations that have that. I think, to me, it suggests that there wasn't even a cursory look at some of the issues here on White Beach. It would have been easy to go to the town assessor's maps and look and see whether there were any private residences that abutted Ocean Street by White Beach. That wasn't done. Nor was it done, seemingly, any kind of analysis that suggested that there would be the possibility of putting in a rotary or a turnaround on the west side of Ocean Street where the road would end. If you look at that land, I do not believe that there is any possibility to create a rotary. You might be able to do it for mini cars, but for fire safety equipment, for things such as waste management trucks, which are enormous, things such as landscaping services, UPS, FedEx, I do not believe that you could create a rotary there. The option would be to have the fire safety trucks back up all the way to Victoria Lane to turn around.
If you go further down the street, you see very clearly that the utilities are buried under the White Beach portion of Ocean Street. It's both the water pipes, which are probably 100 years old and frequently breaking. It's also the National Grid electrical service. The comment has been made to me that, well, that's not a problem. We probably wouldn't even have to move those utilities. But I question what we would have to do. Give scuba gear to National Grid to fix the pipes. It seems like it would be a fortune to move those utilities. You go further down the road and you look at the situation, and there is a representation made that citizens will not lose access to White Beach because we'll be able to create a parking lot out of Little Crow Island. If you look at the topography of Little Crow Island, and I doubt that any request has been made of the Conservation Commission to really determine whether or not that's even feasible because it's marshland and wetland. But you would essentially have to deforest the town property, and you'd probably have to blast to fit in any kind of parking lot or any turnaround in that area. So as I look at it, and I guess the new metric has become, gee, it costs $3,000 worth of DPW time to clear the road. And this, by the way, is for a community that pays something in the order of $625,000 a year in real estate taxes. But if the metric is now, gee, we have to save on town expenses and it costs $3,000 to clear the road, I would argue that the many, many people that would be involved in this project, and if you look at the grant application, it is a series of people. I think there's 13 people plus a number of different groups. If you look at the time that they're going to have to commit, the billable hours, it is excessive for a project that probably can't happen. My second point would be that we have made, in my view, a lot of misrepresentations and omissions to the MAPC. We have given different justifications for this project to the town and the community. We've given a different representation to the MAPC. As was said earlier, there's been really no governing body that sanctioned this grant application. And I believe that it's just simply the passionate views and belief of a few particular citizens or few particular employees. When I look at the cover letter to the grant application, it tells us that, it would be removing a section of roadway and so on and restoring the barrier beach using living shoreline techniques. And then it is said, we are excited to have this opportunity to use a natural solution. Well, I don't know a lot of people that are excited about this opportunity, and it seems to be the passionate belief of a few employees. As has been referenced, this is not a priority situation, and I do not believe that MAPC understands the growing outrage of many of the citizens. My third point, and I'm going to digress for a moment, and I'm going to connect the dots after I do.
Brenda, I know, and I want to hear everything you want to say, but we want to try to keep to the time.
This is the
limit.
end of the
Okay,
my
thank you.
My third point, I was reading some minutes that are posted on the town's website. These are minutes from many months ago, but during 2018. I'm going to read a portion of these minutes. It says, persons A and B discussed their meeting with Alan Houle at Manchester Hardware regarding the pass-through between the town hall parking lot and the Beach Street. Now, you're looking at me, but there is a point here, and there are two projects in this town that are passionately being pushed. One is Ocean Street, and the other is this path from the town hall parking lot. The minutes read, Mr. Hooley was polite but not receptive to our ideas. We decided to continue the process by looking at other ways to impress him with the concept. We should have other townspeople mention the project to him. We discussed the idea of providing an abatement of taxes of some amount in that the town has a sewer easement across the property. We also mentioned the possibility of the town plowing his parking lot. Person A will address the abatement issue with the town administrator. Person B will speak to the DPW director regarding plowing. I'm sorry. That is borderline bribery. And I will tell you that what it says to me is that this town does not have the oversight, the processes, the management, or the understanding of what's going on with some of these committees. And to be honest with you, I don't want to see another committee formed without that in place. Thank you.
Anybody else? Mr. Shipman, and then back here.
Bill Shipman, I have an easy question, I think. Who initiated this study?
The grant study?
Yes.
Yeah.
Who?
It came out, it was done but through our Mary Riley, who is our, through the hazard mitigation plan, right?
Right, so it evolved from a discussion Mary and I had when we saw the application come out.
And then after you had that discussion, who initiated it?
Well, I asked Mary to pursue it.
So you encouraged this to happen and asked her to do it. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Did you talk to the residents of Ocean Street?
We did not at the time, no.
So all of this was done without their knowledge.
Correct.
That's why you're getting pushback right now. This is horrible management. Horrible. And you're going to pay a price for it, which you are now, because people are terribly upset.
I acknowledge that in my opening remarks.
And I'm acknowledging it in my remarks.
Correct.
My name is Bob Miller. 114 Beach Street, you're not going to like my comments. Apropos of what Bill has said, this is irresponsible. The selectmen are not doing their job. You ought to be on top of this. This sort of stuff doesn't go on. It's like this darn landing we had for boats over here that was supposed to cost X and it cost $50 or $60 or $150,000. What are the selectmen doing? It's unacceptable. We're paying the freight. The second thing I'd like to know is, if this grant goes through or a grant similar to it, is there any commitment directly or indirectly now or in the future to follow through with additional sums of money to be spent? But I'd really like to come back to the submission of this grant application. It's unacceptable. And the Board of Selectmen ought to feel very bad about this and very responsible. It should never happen again.
Any other comments?
Thank you. Mike Carvalho, 2 Jersey Lane. I have maybe a unique perspective, and that the work that I do is in this space, and I do it nationally. And I have the opportunity to see how other communities look at issues of climate change and the approach that they take. And one approach that I'm hearing here, unfortunately, is to put your head in the sand and not want to learn or study. I think there's always value in learning and studying. I think that's always an appropriate approach, and that it should be considered. And what I'm hearing here in some of these negative comments, setting aside pretty outrageous comments I've heard, in some of the more thoughtful comments, there's a lot of questions. And I believe that the study will address many of those concerns. To suggest that we have to ignore whatever comes out of that study, that's ridiculous. That's not how we build a community, we address problems. So the fact that a grant was made, there was an opportunity to get essentially free money for the community to study an issue that affects all of us, is appropriate. I think Greg, you should be commended for undertaking that study. Now, there's always issues with wordsmithing, and I always try to learn from any feedback that I get. But I think it's entirely appropriate to consider what the impact of this living shoreline could be. And one of the options would be doing nothing. And it may be that the resources that are required for that specific area are too much. And that allows us to redirect those resources to other areas. But at least we'll know, and at least we'll have an informed opinion. And we can disagree about opinions, but if they're informed opinions, at least we'll all know where we're coming from. Simply saying no doesn't work.
So I'd like to know the answer to my question. Any, as a result of putting this application for grant in, is there any commitment, directly, indirectly, now or in the future, to do something to accept the grant?
No, there's not.
And I also think it would be better in the future if we submit applications like that to talk to some of the people whose property is in the area we're going to study, who are paying taxes, who have houses which have certain valuations, which could be affected by access, and so forth. And I think it's a selectman's job to look at this and make sure this is happening. We've had some mistakes. We got to cut down on.
Point taken, thank you. Anything else? Can you just grab the mic, please?
So is there any commitment
Hold
now
on.
in the future, directly or indirectly, as a result of having submitted this application?
No, we said no. There's not.
No, I believe what you said, that we have to, I'm Ernst from Metro Ireland, that we have to study the environment and everything. But actually, as I pointed out today, we have a living beach in Manchester, which we can study, which has been studied for years. It's on Magnolia Beach in Manchester. And so if we want to pursue what the effects of everything is, we don't have to create another barrier beach. There's one already.
All right. One more comment, Jessica. And the other one.
Jessica Lamoff, 21 Walker Road. I'm a little shocked at some of these comments. I don't know if people realize sometimes that these grants come up and there's very little time often to act on them, and you never know. There's probably, I don't know if Greg knows, there's probably 100 grants that we've applied for and don't get. There's no guarantee when you apply for a grant you're going to get it. So I think to say that people are wrong to jump on grants and at least to see what happens is just kind of blowing my mind. So I'm with Mike, and I commend Greg for moving on these things at the beginning.
Okay. Any other comments? No. Okay. Just in terms of the process for the grant piece, one thing we've agreed to do, and I think is important, is as we are looking at grants relative to anything coming through, is posting them in advance of application. So if we're looking for grants and we're going to forward with them up on the website, we can actually put them up in an easy access place so anyone who's interested in looking at the town can do that. One of the practices that we are taking in place now is that if there is an impact to a local community, that those abutters will be directly connected or communicated with. But it's also important that the rest of the town knows what's going on, because there's people that don't live there that would be impacted by that as well. So there'll be a two-step effort for that. So those are some of the lessons learned that we have so far. If we finish the public comment, I want to make sure everyone's had their voice. Okay, then I'd like the board to discuss this, and let's see where we come. So go around the table.
So I'd be interested in redirecting
Okay.
the current grant application, Greg, if that's within the MAPC scope. And I also believe, to Greg's point, there are plenty of people sitting in this room that are very passionate about this issue. We need your help. We need to put a group together to work on the future of this community, because it is all our responsibilities to do that. The water's not going out, it's coming in. White Beach is one area. It's just one that somebody thought was a good idea to start looking at. I don't believe for 1 minute it was done with any wrong reasons. Grants come up. You apply for them and you see what happens. 6, 7, 8 years ago, we never applied for $200. We don't have a choice but to apply for and accept when appropriate grant money. Because if we don't do it that way, we'll have articles on town meeting looking for money to help get experts in to help solve some of these issues.
Yeah, I have, I guess I have 5 observations and 1 recommendation. Observations are, from my own limited experience and just, from the limited time I've been trying to help the town on this board, grant money is very good, it's very limited. And I think in this particular situation, we risk weakening the reputation of the town through misfiring. I think we've misfired. Second observation is I think we've failed communication. I think we've failed to incorporate resident input and involvement, and I think we've failed to communicate sufficiently as a town. Resident value failure. I think this project, as it's defined, is focused on a very small amount of residents and number of properties, but it seems to be consuming a high amount of town resource and time, this meeting in itself. I think we have a process failure from earlier. I think the process should be coming through the planning board and be an endorsed plan from the town planner and be presented to the board. The fact that it's rising to the board for a final arbitration seemed like a broken process. I think town risk management is probably the biggest observation. This is probably the one I care the most about. I think we're missing the larger coastal risk as it relates to town overall and where it affects the most amount of residents. So if we're going to secure a grant of this size, with all respect to Ocean Street and the residents, I just saw an earlier presentation with a heck of a lot more people threatened by a 25-year floodplain than we've already had 100-year storms. So we have a sewage treatment plant that's going to affect the entire town. We have a town hall. We have a police station that floods. They mop water out. And our goal is to water tighten town hall, which seems like a very, very short-term plan. So we've got other roads. If we're going to talk about the impact of the town, I think Beach Street, 127, back on Summer Street, a whole different section further down towards Magnolia. In the case of any sort of significant flooding, where I live on the other side of town, on Bridge Street, we risk having entire roads cut off. So if I'm thinking about what matters to the town, we've got much bigger problems. I'm not saying that White and Black Beach aren't a problem, but we have to focus on where the biggest threats to the town are, and I just don't see White and Black Beach as a major issue relative to the much bigger things we've got. So I would, I think grants are precious. I would do everything we could to retain this since we've won it, but I would redirect it entirely to looking at where lives are most affected and where the coastline is most affected. So, again, we have a perfect candidate with Sawmill Brook. I don't even know if we know how many people are affected by that, but I'm really bothered by the fact that people in those neighborhoods, I don't think know what we know, and that's a failure of government. And then, if not that, then why don't we have an executable plan off the shelf for the sewage treatment plant? Because that is very likely going to go in anything more than 25 years, and I might be wrong, but we need to be able to flip a switch, and I don't know if we should, if we do have that, that's great. The fact that I don't know maybe is an indicator in itself of the level of confidence. So.
Okay. So, first of all, I am in agreement with some of the town administrator's initial comments that the way that grant was first written it wasn't good, and that's unfortunate. And I totally understand that would upset a lot of residents. In fact, when I read the final grant, I was, I thought it was a little too bluntly stated towards the, goal of abandonment. and I think that was unfortunate. So there's a bunch of different ways of fixing that. One is to rewrite the grant into a way that's more focused towards what we originally were trying to do. And folks have asked, who authorized this grant. While the town administrator did sign the grant, there was discussion at the board level about where we want to, where there are issues. And Ocean Street has been discussed multiple times because it's part of infrastructure which has been damaged by storms. And we regularly talk about, the seawall and the repairs that need to be done to it, and the impact, the long-term impact of the town of not doing anything at Ocean Street. We know it's not the highest priority, but grants of opportunity are very important to us. The Central Street culvert, we just got, was it 400,000? For that, because we jumped on a grant, and we're good right now at going after grants. And the town's infrastructure can benefit from that, but we do have to move quickly on those grants. Now, I am very much definitely in the camp that having more data is better than having less data. It's not always the case that getting that data is going to provide you with a set of options that everybody is going to like. In fact, pretty much any option you pick where you're going to be modifying town infrastructure in any significant way, you're guaranteed to have some people who are not going to be happy with the way it gets modified. Now, while I understand that everybody was upset by the initial wording of that grant, I know for a fact that since then, the town administrator has been taking the feedback from people and going back to the original funders of the grant to get that thing rephrased and brought into a form, which is what I think were really originally trying to achieve, which was to develop some options for Ocean Street, which we knew was an issue for our infrastructure in the long term. Along comes this grant, which is a grant of opportunity. It comes up now. Grants, when they come up, you have like 6 weeks maybe to put your proposals in, and the grant's gone. That money is going to go someplace else. We are living and dying in parts of our planning right now by our ability to chase grants and develop plans as a result. Not all of the plans are put into action. Not all of our grant requests are funded. Many are not. Sometimes we miss the deadlines by just a little squeak, and whoops, there goes a $1 million grant. Can't tell you how many of those have gone by. It's too bad, but in the past several years, we've achieved like $4 million of funding from outside sources to develop plans for this town, which some of which have gone into effect, some of which have not, but it has helped this town. So the town administrator has worked to reshape that grant in a way which is what we more originally intended, namely give us some options related to Ocean Street. Some of those options are not going to be popular. Some of those options will be popular, but it will be a spectrum of data from which the town can make informed decisions. I am very reluctant, even though we made a mistake in the initial phrasing of this grant, to respond to this by saying, "Oh no, that hurt, man. That got a lot of people angry." I think the turning away from that and going to find some other project because we goofed on the initial pass is not the right approach. I think correcting that original plan position, correcting the original proposal, and moving forward, making sure that you folks are well informed in the process and have a say in it, is the right way to go. It will result in a plan which has some options that you're not going to like. As it's currently worded, it will also result in plans that the result you would like. So I'm in favor of funding the revised or accepting the revised grant proposal, which the funders of the grant have said that they would do. The funders of the grant have also tentatively said they would might support us redirecting it someplace else. But where we might redirect it is not really clear. And it would be driven primarily not because of our actually planning to use that grant on something else, but because we have a negative response on the way we initially formed that original grant. And I don't think that's right either. So I think that we should be taking the grant proposal modified to provide more options instead of just the one which says abandon, and involve residents in the process going forward. And as painful as that may be for everybody, I think having data is better than not. That's my position on this.
Becky?
First of all, I would like to say it's really nice to see so many people at a meeting. We usually don't have anybody. And so I do take great exception to anybody being vilified. I just think that's highly, highly inappropriate and not acceptable. So that said, I think that it is important that people be included. Transparency is very important, and the fact that we're going to be able to put these online is great. I think that there's been a huge effort to have information readily accessible online. It's an ongoing process and one which we're constantly working on. And I hope people will avail themselves of that information and actually read it. I do hope that that more people continue to be involved with moving forward on this. I do feel that it is a good idea to go forward with the grant. It does not obligate us in any way. It gives us information, as Eli said, and it gives us a lot of information, some of which people might not like, some of which they might, none of which commits us, just information. And I think that, as has been said multiple times, better to have some more information and know what options we have in addition to what we may or may not be coming up against. So I am in favor of going forward, and I do hope that some of the people who are strongly motivated will continue to be involved and choose to help out with this.
Thank you. So, I guess it's up to me. At the end of the day, I spent a lot of time thinking about this. And I want to be really clear. This isn't about because people, I want to acknowledge the fact that we hear people that are upset. We've acknowledged the fact that we have to do better at getting out there and communicating. But in my heart's heart, after being on the master plan for 4 years and working against all of the different priorities that we see in this town and the things that are important, this is an important issue. That said, I'm not sure it's the only important issue. And I really do feel strongly that we need to take a step back and look at this and say, let's prioritize, let's understand where we need to go with this, and let's have it make some sense. I go back to the codification of the planning board and the necessity for them to get beyond some of the tactical things that they have to do as part of their job and get more into the planning side of this, because it's a crucial part of something that we're missing. We can only do so much with a town planner, but we have elected officials that are responsible for that as well. And we need to have them engaged and working with us. We can't do everything as Board of Selectmen, God knows. We are not experts on everything, but we do take into account the people who have planning experience, who have experience in conservation, who have experience in zoning and all of those things to help inform us and give us the data that we need to move forward. So I want to be really clear here. My decision and my feeling is to redirect, take a pause, hit the button for a minute, not to necessarily say that this is going to go off the table completely. I would like to talk with MAPC. but I want to be very deliberate about what it is that we're looking at. I don't want to go forward just because it's what we said we were going to do and we're going to do it. I think we have to pause. I think we have to do that. And I feel very strongly that we should identify in the next couple of weeks in working with MAPC, our town planner, our resources that we've got to see what pops up as priorities and how we need to address it going forward. And we have a lot of lessons learned here. And to Becky's point, I understand and I feel the frustration and the anger, but you have volunteers and elected officials who take this responsibility seriously and understand that comes with it the responsibility of taking the criticism as well as the accolades for the work that we do. But I do want to move forward in a very congenial, collaborative way with folks. So I invite you to become part of the process with us. And I think we'll move forward that direction. So unless there's any other comments from the board.
I have one more comment.
Yep.
I just wanted to clarify that when I say go forward, I mean as redirect, with the
Oh.
modified
Okay.
scope.
All right, well, that's helpful. We know that. Well, we're about to put forward a vote on this, so we'll be very clear about it. Any other comments from the board of selectmen? Any other comments from the folks? Okay.
Redirect means finding a totally different location, or if redirect means taking the bigger scope of looking at three things, because I kind of feel like maybe it means-
Redirect is looking at a different opportunities.
Thank you, Jess.
So, sorry, one thing I never heard in all of this is what is the amount of the grant on the table?
32?
32,000.
32,000. Yeah. And I
So,
think, I'm sorry.
Just point of information, in terms of talking about alternative study areas, today I talked to them about the Magnolia Beach / Gray Beach area in Clark Pond, working with the trustees in their ownership of that stretch of beach. So that was one, and B was engaging in a community discussion process about the barrier, the storm barrier. The 32,000 would not get us very far in terms of design work on that barrier idea, but it could initiate a community-wide dialogue about that option.
I'd like to make a suggestion that I would seriously pause on the barrier idea until that is more fully socialized in town. Like that just seems like another problem waiting.
Well, I think to the point of, we have a window of opportunity. We need to see the time frame. We don't want to bite the hand that feeds us with the grant. However, that said, we want to make sure we engage the community quickly, and it may take time to do that, but we want to get those steps in place first. I
So-
think if anything we've learned here, that's an important piece.
In talking with Darcy, who's the main administrator for MAPC, she said, we understand that public opinion, and she's very aware. I've been very upfront about the opposition to the study. She gets that, and she says, if you need to say no this time around, that's not affecting you and our eyes down the road. So they're willing to work with us on lots of different levels.
Well, I don't want to look a gift horse in the mouth either, so I think if we can spend the next few weeks identifying, coming up with a plan that says, here's how we will interact to get the answers that we need to, then we should move ahead with that. So I'm ready to take a vote from the board. Does anybody have a motion?
I would like to make a motion to accept the grant with the wording amended in terms of what you sent. I need to go back to that page.
I think what we're talking about is redirecting first before accepting.
Right.
So I think we need to
Maybe a
identify.
better phrasing here is to negotiate a different project
Okay.
with the funds, if I might suggest that.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
Again, encourage you to go back to the hazard and mitigation plan and the action item called out, which I think is very articulate, and try to use that as the basis for your renegotiation.
Okay, so we have a motion to renegotiate
focus of the
focus
study.
of the study. Thank you. I'm so tired. Okay. Anybody else have anything else to add to that? A second? Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any other comments? All in favor? Aye. Aye.
Nope.
Opposed? Okay.
Nope.
All right, so we have 4-1, and we'll continue this discussion in our February meeting. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Do you realize that every single school committee meeting I used to have was like this when we were building in high school? It was amazing. I've gotten so out of shape.
I'll never volunteer for the school committee.
Okay. Do we have anything else? Oh, we have to talk about the budget.
No,
real quick.
yeah, let's just
All
let
right,
it go.
yeah. All right, we're
Have
gonna
you?
pause for a minute and then we're gonna
I
talk
have
about
no
the budget.
idea. I've been coming and going and so many.
Our meeting here tonight, we have a final update on our budget discussion. And Greg, do you want to give us a heads up on that?
So in general, things continue to go pretty smoothly in terms of town budget. We have some decisions to make in terms of some staffing changes that were tentatively put into the budget. We'll have more details on that for you on the 19th to talk a little bit more in detail about that. It's pertinent to tonight's discussion about communications and how we better manage that. So that'll be coming up. There's been some minor tweaking that'll happen that'll be covered by the savings that we had in the pension total. Last week at the school committee hearing that was in Essex, we learned that Essex is concerned about the 3.41 increase that they would face. The overall budget is 3.3, but because of the enrollment change, they take a higher hit. So they asked the school committee if they could sharpen the pencil anywhere. I think the consensus, and you can certainly chime in, but I think the consensus is that they really aren't more pencils to sharpen, but they will dig a little deeper in terms of reserve fund dollars that can be used in case it's needed and be able to refund those reserves going forward with the savings, which are substantial actually, on the bonding for the new school. So in a 3 or 4 sentence line, that's where we are.
Yeah. So I think the issue here at hand, and I appreciate, and I think we are moving directionally where we need to be with the budget, and we're in pretty good shape with that overall. You know, we can't
No.
shut the door. You can't.
We can't.
You can't.
can't.
Open meeting. So, but I think this question that Essex brings forward is important to think about, and I would like to have a board discussion about that and get some input, because we had a collaboration meeting where we talked a little bit about this. Their biggest issue is, and you may have said this, and I might have missed it, they had an uplift in their retirement fund.
So one of the things that's driving them is they did have a substantial increase in their pension funding
Right.
requirement, which you probably should learn more about as to why, but.
Well, yeah, yeah.
And then they do also have some retirements, and there's leave time buybacks that they are facing. So there are some one-time hits
Yep.
that they feel that if they can get through this year, they'll be a little better shape. But I think longer term, there are some structural issues here.
Right. So I think from the Manchester perspective and as a partner in the school district, the question I raise is what precedent does this set relative to having an issue with a one-time? I mean, it could be us next year, right? All of a sudden something goes kaplooey and we can't do it. But as important to that, the second piece is what happens in the out years. So if there's an opportunity to drop back and take reserves, for example, from the school, what happens next year when they've got to fill that gap? And what does that do to us, direct impact, if that in fact happens? So, and I said this very clearly to Essex, and we are empathetic and we understand how difficult this is. just as the schools were in the position last year with the health budget, right, the healthcare. So we all have our own internal battles to fight, but I think this one has an important piece because we are a partner. And obviously, with the school district and understanding how tightly strapped you folks are, it'll be an interesting conversation you have tomorrow night in terms of what you want to do. But I thought it would be helpful for you to hear sort of what the board thought here in Manchester. So, any comments from anybody?
I'm concerned also about the precedents it sets, but also, if when we talk about using money from another source, is this to cover them, or are we talking about reducing the whole amount? If we reduce 35 for Essex, then we reduce 65 for Manchester, right? So we're down $100,000 on a project.
So that's not the game plan. So the game plan would be to not charge the communities that 100,000, absorb it in their through their reserves for now.
Can you just, Shannon, can you just grab the
Sorry.
thing?
Shannon Erdman, Manchester, and I'm also chair of the school committee. The idea is that we would take $100,000 out of our reserves, put it into our operating budget, which would thereby send a smaller bill to the member towns.
Right.
So.
And then when do we pay that back?
Hmm?
When do we pay that back?
So the reserve gets refunded. The hope is through the basically the interest earning on the bonding. So that they just bonded 35 million. So that 35 million will sit in the bank until they need to spend it. So when it sits in the bank, it can go to work and earn some dollars.
But we can do that? Are we legally allowed to say, okay, we've got the bond, but we took some money from here, we can then put it back over there?
Well, yes. So legally, interest income goes right into the general fund. And from there, you can put it in a stabilization account, which we will probably do. So that's totally legal, totally above board. But
Is there an interest rate that the district is charging?
excuse me, an
Or
interest rate that we're
rate?
charging?
Yeah, you're lending money.
No, we're not lending money. We're just reducing the bill that we send to the member towns. We're not lending money. We're just,
You're lending money.
no, we're not
No.
charging an interest rate.
Okay, but you're,
So their bond is at a 3.28% rate. They will probably earn in the low twos.
I think we locked it in at 289, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's a good rate.
Yeah, it was an excellent rate, especially since we, when we went for the vote, we were working on about a 5% coupon. Wow. So yeah, over the course of the loan, we're going to save about $17 million. Yep, based on what we went out with on the vote.
how do
So-
you say that you're not lending money? How do you say that you're not lending money? If they're not able to pay their due and you're relieving them, how is that?
We're also relieving you guys. We're charging interest either.
But we're not failing to meet our portion.
There's no difference between what they're doing and when they've used reserves in the
I'm
past.
just trying to understand. I'm not trying to, my interpretation, I'm not trying to, I'm not
No,
accusatory,
no.
I'm just trying to literally understand like how this.
No,
money is flowing.
every year we're asked to basically hit a target in terms of our assessment, and we do, and we cut and we cut and we cut.
No, I'm not.
We're not lending money.
I'm going back to the Essex part.
It's kind of
So
the same
they're
thing.
tapping into their reserves instead of charging the towns that amount. So is that lending money?
Yeah, that's my point.
But then we do it every year. We would be lending money every year
We do the
because
same thing. We
Yeah.
tap into our own reserves.
Is there a precedent, I guess, in the state of Massachusetts for a district to do this?
Yes.
I don't
For
know.
a town that's not able to meet its obligation on a district agreement?
Yes. Yeah, they will adjust.
Do we know where there is precedent?
Here, this has happened
done
here
it- we've
multiple
done it-
times,
we've done it here
where the
before.
school has dipped into their reserves to patch up an operating budget mismatch because we couldn't do a Proposition 2.5 override in a town, one
I'm
town
not
or the other.
questioning the district, I'm questioning
It's a mechanic,
financial
it's
management
a
from Essex.
financial
And I'm not trying to
mechanics.
point a finger, I'm just literally
Yeah.
trying to understand what we're getting obligated into here.
Understood.
But in the past, to Eli's point, in the early stages of the region, where the costs were upwards of 6% uplift, we had to find ways to deal with that. And we did negotiate with the towns, and we did overrides, and we did a number of different mechanisms. So it has been done before. Where I don't think it has been done as quickly as this is in terms of last minute coming down to the short strokes on this, is to go ahead and make it happen, in the 11th hour to make it come back. I personally have a little question about using interest money and I understand it all flows through, but I really feel like the benefits that we've gotten from the school project need to be earmarked for the school project and to make sure that whatever shortfalls we've got and everything else. So at the end of the day, we will turn out maybe better than whole, but I'm a little worried about covering back and forth on that as well.
In the meantime,
Right. That would just be my.
Yeah.
So a good focus is to cut back, in a sense, on capital expenditure and use those dollars, earned dollars, interest dollars, to backfill those capital needs.
Yeah, keep
Right.
We've talked
capital,
about that as well.
capital,
Yep,
operating.
we've talked
and
about that as
operating.
well. I believe we
Capital The school capital.
School capital.
school capital, maintenance of the buildings, and so on and so forth. I believe we have on the line item for CapEx is
60.
60.
60,
Yeah.
something like that. And
And-
it used to be 90, right? I mean, you've already
We'd
trimmed
love it
30
to be
out.
100.
Yeah, we used to be that.
And
So
it should
we-
be higher. Right now, it's not ideal. There's corners being cut,
Yeah.
which should be repaired in future budgets, because otherwise you'll be needing to come back to us with larger requests later on.
My question is, if we can do this, then why are we having to cut corners?
Well, so this brings the broader issue, right, which, and we talk about this quite a bit, is that the actual need to run the school district way exceeds 2.5, way exceeds 3.25. There has to be a very serious digging in and audit of what the school spending is, because as it stands today, it's not sustainable over time. And we've been talking about this for a very long time. So I think regardless of what decision the school district makes in terms of supporting Essex in this request or not, the postscript to that is starting the day after the budget's passed, the digging has to start. And the real focus of looking through this year and spending time and understanding there's only so much they can do, but they may have to think about doing business differently. And that's a challenge.
Agreed, point taken, but I think if you look at many schools across the Commonwealth and across the country, I don't think anybody can do it at low
I agree.
3%.
I agree.
I don't think anybody can do it below 2.5.
Right.
So
So that makes
it's a larger philosophical conversation.
It is, but I think what we have to stop doing is pretending that it can be and trying to get to an artificial number. Let's get to what the number is. Let's understand what that is, and then through our master plan process, through our budget process, and our partners with Essex, what can we do and what's realistic? Because there may be years where it's going to be cyclical, right? We may have to go for overrides. We may have to decide that we can't do this. You may have to cut a program for a year or two. Doesn't mean they're gone forever, but do you know what I mean? There needs to be a cadence of this to some
Yeah.
degree.
But I think when anything is cut, it's
Mhm.
much harder and much more expensive to put it back in.
I understand.
So that's what we'd like to avoid.
Yeah.
And
I
It's,
understand.
it's a tough place. It's a really tough place. And to hear this at the last minute from a partner who's been so incredibly supportive, whose, taxpayers came out and voted for a school that they're not going to use, and they're not going to see a vote for a school they're going to use in 10 years. So it's hard. It's a really tough decision.
So I'm still trying to understand. So is the net that you are going to make, or do the district will make compromises within your proposed budget in order to enable Essex?
Not right now. We are going to take $100,000 out of reserves, put it in our operating budget. So we send smaller bills to the towns.
This year.
This year. However, next year, it's a bigger hole to fill. We are already going to be cutting to make a 3.3 number next year even taking Essex out of the conversation.
Yeah,
We have cut,
My questions are.
we've cut nearly $1.9 million out of our budget over the last 3 years because of the healthcare issue we had,
Yeah.
without going back to the towns.
My argument is in defense of the district. I'm just trying to understand why you guys are having to disrupt your operating planning in order to accommodate Essex, which I understand why you do, because Essex is a
They're
great partner.
looking to fill a hole anywhere.
Right,
They
because-
are looking to, everyone who sends them a bill, they're looking for anywhere they can cut. And we are one of the
I guess what I'm.
big billers.
So I'm arguing in defense of the district is where I'm coming from.
No, I understand what you're saying.
My concern is that they're also, and I'm not casting judgment on Essex in the least. I'm just concerned that that town is also pursuing several capital-intensive projects simultaneous to asking the district to do this.
Yes.
Which in the interest of the district and the kids of the district
Yes.
doesn't seem fair.
Yes. That's why it's a very
So that's
hard
why I
decision.
jumped on the question about are you lending? Because the way you just described it, it is a form of lending. Because
Agreed. Semantics,
Not-
yes.
yes.
Or I don't know if it would be legal for us to, I don't know how that would work.
I don't want to get caught up in the definition of lending as a technical.
Anyway, Arthur, yes, it is a tough decision, given all of the aspects you just illustrated.
Yeah, well,
Because at
yeah,
the end
I
of the
mean-
day, our kids take a hit.
I know, that's my problem.
And that's why we're sitting where we're sitting.
And I'm concerned, I get it, and we need to do what we need to do. I'm
Yeah.
on board with that. And I'm not casting judgment on Essex in the least, because I love Essex. But I think as a responsibility to this town,
Mhm.
which is really what I have, as a partner shared in a district beyond this year, what are we looking at? Because it's a much bigger question. If we shuffle things around and make it work for this year,
That's our concern,
generous
too.
and that's great. But if we have a town knowingly going into several significant capital projects, which is also going to affect their annual operating budget, that's a concern.
And it's
It's not a judgment, it's just a
It's the
concern
same
in the
concern
interest
we
of
have.
Manchester.
It's the same concern we have. Because if we do this, then we set a precedent,
Yeah.
but we're also setting a precedent to dip into our reserves.
Yeah.
Somebody said last week, once you dip your toe in the water, you're in the water.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff will become wet once you're in the water.
Exactly. So that's what we're wrestling with. And it's also a partner, as I said, who's been incredibly supportive. It's a big lift for us. So we'll be talking about this tomorrow night. The reality is we vote for the budget. We adopt the budget tomorrow night. It's a bottom line number. So I think while we are set with the bottom line number, I think things can move between the top line and the bottom line until town meeting. And it doesn't seem like Essex has all the information that they need. I think they were hit with this just at the last minute. So maybe we have some time to see how things break. Maybe some things break our way or their way. Maybe they get some more information. I don't know yet. Again, 11th hour. And yeah,
So,
it's not ideal.
so a couple of things. One, so the position that you think you're going to take tomorrow that you're going to vote on is not a reduction in the actual budget numbers. So there's not going to be a financial impact or a program's impact to the school this year. That's the plan. So just wanted to be clear on that.
Yes.
The other is an observation that year or two ago, last year I was chair. You guys ran into the insurance mishap, and there was a discussion at one of your budget meetings about using reserves budget reserves to fill the gap. Essex had some leeway in their budget, and a question was asked of me if Manchester would entertain dipping into our reserves to help fill the gap. And I said at the time, well, if it was an issue of either Manchester dipping into their reserves, the town dipping into their reserves, or the school dipping into their reserves, why should it not be the school dipping into their reserves? So I pushed it back on you guys at that time in a similar sort of a situation, because I thought that was the right thing to do for the town. While I'm not necessarily opposed to the district, helping Essex out in this situation, because I do believe we're something of a community. I think it's a fairly parallel situation. And by the metrics that I applied to you guys a couple of years ago, it's in the gray area.
I agree.
Is there any risk to the district credit rating?
No.
If it was ongoing, yes.
If we continue to dip into reserves, yes, but $100,000 now. And I believe we have also locked in a new credit rating. We're moving from Moody's AA to S&P
AA plus.
AA plus. So while that may not save us money in the near term, it's a good thing.
Do we know Essex credit rating?
I don't know how.
It's A plus, but it's 2011 on their website, so it's more than 7 years old.
Anyway, Shannon, did you get some feedback, perspective?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well,
It's-
I don't
it's a
know
tough
who
spot
can-
for us.
Anyone who can attend. Are you going tomorrow night? Okay. It'd be great just to sort of hear and present that. So, okay. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Any other topics on budget or anything else tonight?
This is a one-time expenditure, so we typically do. That would be a planning board decision on how to.
I think it's going to be really important to sit down with the planning board and go through all of this process, because in fairness to you, Christine, if no one's done that and you don't understand how it works, then it needs to happen. Well, yeah, I know, but I'm just saying, and yeah. So I think that the last postscript on this, which I think is really important, if we have a planning board that doesn't understand what their roles and responsibilities are, what their jurisdiction is, and how they work with the town planner, we've got a big problem. So let's get that fixed as soon as we can, because we need to make sure that we are functioning as we turn the page, not just on the master plan, but overall planning in general. So I think we need to be accountable, they need to be accountable, and we need to get it done. So that said, unless there's anybody else who has any other questions, do you?
No.
Oh, anybody else? All right. Okay, so here we are. I think we're done.
It's 8:30, isn't it?
I don't know what time it is. Yeah. Anybody have anything else? Okay, we'll
Bye,
take, thank
Shannon.
you.
Yes.
I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.